100 days with a flooded nuclear reactor in Mechanisms. Yep, that's right. The captain is finally diving into, no pun intended, a Mechanisms mod, an extremely popular advanced tech mod where we will be attempting to make a nuclear fission reactor. I say attempting because we have to deal with a whole lot. Rivers overflowing, tsunamis, and even a massive global flood. And remember everyone, you do not need to like this video or subscribe or comment or do anything like that. As long as you're watching this video and enjoying any part of it at all, you're doing more for me than you could possibly ever imagine. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I know I really enjoyed making it. So let's see what happened. Our adventure begins as we get thrown into this pristine, beautiful valley. I look around to see that the world is covered in snow-capped mountains, and while I'm pretty happy about that, I'm much more excited about this. Our very first thing we pick up, of course, is a tea leaf. It doesn't end there though, because soon we come across this beautiful, pristine lake in the middle of our snow-capped valley. And this looks like the perfect place to put my nuclear waste production facility. I mean, nuclear reactor, of course. I get down into the valley and find a flat little spot where I am super excited to build. I see that both sides are in fact covered with these beautiful snow-capped mountains, and I gotta say, this is gonna be the perfect spot to start our 100 days. So, let's get started. Of course, we do the classic and get our very first wooden pick to start us off. But like every Minecraft player, I cannot stand wooden tools, so I go to rush a stone pick when I find osmium ore. Then I find uranium ore, but this isn't nuclear crafting uranium ore. Both of these are from Mekanism, a brand new mod that we are going to be playing. Right now though, let's stick to the classics and get some coal. We can craft up a torch, and then we can find some iron. Of course, I can't get it without the stone tools, so let's go back up and grab one of those. So we do grab the iron, and then very quickly, I grab the uranium. I'm not going to need it for like 30 days, but like a moth to the flame, I just love this stuff. I am, however, going to need this andesite, so we grab some here, and copper never hurt either. Now, what definitely can hurt is a creeper explosion right to your dumb face. I have no weapons, barely any food, and no armor, so this is actually a huge threat. And of course, I fumble it pretty bad. Get down to 3 hearts right away. Yeah. Now, as night comes, I have to hide away and keep away from, well, one of these stinky boys. He sneaks up behind me, and I have to be really careful here. Luckily, there's just one of them. Still, as I poke my head up to the top, I see skeletons out there, and yeah, maybe a better idea just to hide away for right now. So we duck our heads back inside. Not all bad news though. We shove a clove of garlic down our throats, and we get 2 hearts. Not that they're going to be filling in anytime soon. Then I come to grips with my situation. I'm going to be stuck down here, so I put down a crafting table because I'm going to be here a while. And after crafting up a furnace, we get our very first little pieces of iron. Now, of course, we have the classic dilemma for any Minecraft player. I have to decide what to do with my first iron. Of course, I get a pick, but with all the mobs, I probably should get a sword too. And the farmer inside of me says we should get a bucket. We do, after all, have a little bit of copper though. I decide this is going to go towards my kit. It was a good decision too, because copper is basically the same as iron with a little more toughness. But of course, none of this compares to osmium. Osmium is a core ore, that rhymes, in Mechanism, and it makes some pretty good kit too. So I decide to switch out the copper and put in some osmium. Nope, not tin, Captain. There you go, buddy. We start cooking this up. Turns out osmium kit is just like too good. In fact, it might even be a little bit OP. But, I mean, have you guys been watching how close I've been getting to death? I could use every little bit. So I put on this osmium helmet. It looks pretty clean too. I'm loving it. And the boots look good too. But it's not all about Mechanism. We grab some create zinc so we can get started on our very first project. We won't get to our next project tomorrow if we die today. I get ambushed in these caves by a skeleton, and the osmium gear barely keeps me alive. I block myself in, but with no food, we have to tunnel our way out of here. We pop our heads out, and I gotta say, I've never been so happy to see the sunlight before. We get an osmium pick, which turns out to be pretty good, and it starts to rain, which reminds me that we have realistic water physics on. We're gonna have to be careful about that. But for right now, I gotta stay focused. I get myself a copper hoe and put down our first tea, because we obviously really need some food. I start to do a little scavenging and just eating whatever foods I can find around the forest. The good news about tea is that tea grows year-round, so this should start growing anytime now. I take a peek at the water levels, and the rain doesn't seem to be causing the river to rise yet. I also find this little guy who helps us double our iron, thank you very much, And speaking of things going pretty well, we eat this leek and get another 2 extra hearts. Now I decided I should probably protect those hearts and get my very first set of full osmium gear. This stuff is really good. It's right up there with diamond, honestly. It's a little OP, I admit, but I'm going to take advantage of it, at least for the very beginning. Also, I have Harvester. That means 1 chop cuts down a whole tree. Definitely going to help out in this playthrough. And I use that wood to make some buttons, which I use to make our first cogs. Cogs are the core component of the Create mod, and they're super important. We're actually going to need them to make our pump. We're also going to need some copper smashed into sheets. So I'm going to try to make our press so we can make some copper sheets. After all, it is kind of fitting that we're going to start out with our low-tech machines and build our way up to our reactor. We make our block of iron, our andesite casing. Pretty soon, we can get our little low-techy mechanical press. And it's not too soon, too. We really need a system to control the water because the rain is pouring down. We set up the press and a depot, and when I said low-tech, I wasn't kidding. We start to hand crank this machine to get it bonking and flattening us out some copper. And apparently, a few too many of the calories were going to my arm and not my brain, because I totally forgot that this thing sucks away all of your food. And pretty soon, we're starving. I was lucky I had this apple in my hand, like seriously. My own stupidity is kind of the most dangerous thing to myself at this point. What's also really important is paying attention to this. The water level in the ocean has receded. I don't have to tell you guys, this is unusual. Anytime you're at the beach and the water level starts to recede, but not a good sign. Probably should get out of there. Unfortunately, I wasn't even taking my own advice. In fact, I was actually excited to see the ocean level dropping. I came back to see that my lake is in fact about a full block higher than the ocean level. I can now make a small little canal and hopefully drain out a little extra water. But I'll do that later. I wanted to keep on working and stay focused, so I made my first mechanical pump. Just down the lake a little bit, I saw this shallow, narrow area right here. It basically cut this lake into 2, and I was realizing that this lake was very quickly draining itself. I scouted a little further ahead, and I saw it was really draining. See, the thing about this mod pack, water physics, is that sometimes it can be a little bit buggy. For example, whenever you have a ravine spawn underneath an ocean, it almost certainly means that that ocean will nearly drain out. That's what's happening right here. Despite all the climate change, surprisingly, the ocean levels are actually very rapidly sinking. I grab some diorite, then I scream all night at my crops, telling them that they really should consider growing faster. The next day begins, and now it's time to start our first real project. I'm going to be making a dam all the way across so that I can better control the flow of water. I leave 2 holes in it, because pretty soon we're going to hopefully add our pumps. The idea is, we're going to be able to move water from one lake to another depending on how we need it. We're going to start this project off by making the power source, the windmill. Yeah, meal. That's how I pronounce it. Next up, we craft some sails, and luckily this valley does have some sheep. Then we head back over to the dam. Like I said, in those 2 little holes, we're going to add the pumps. Then somewhere on the middle of the dam at the top, we're going to add this gear. On top of that, we add the windmill bearing, and then we're going to add some block, random block. I usually like to do casing, basically anything that isn't birch. Then we're going to add the sails to this. I start to add them on, and then I'm leaning over here, and yeah, impressively, I actually do okay here. Get all the sails on the first try. I do decide to do a little bit of a unique design this time and make this windmill very tall. We add this large cog so that the gears are facing the right way. Then we pull our little trick. By putting small cogs and then on the end of the small cogs putting a large cog, this will double the speed of the rotation. Then you place a large cog on the axle of that small cog, then again another small cog on the edge of that large cog to double the speed again. By doing this, we can take the very slow windmill and actually make these pumps move pretty quickly. Now that they're powered, we can get this thing started to see if it'll actually work. Sure enough, a mild breeze means it's a pretty weak windmill, but with all these gears, it's still going at a decent speed. I make sure the arrows are pointing the right way, and now we're going to get some pipes that lead down into the water. Since these pipes are only going to be going down about 1 block, they should still have enough suction to work. I make some holes here for the water to collect, and that achievement, there's a leak, proves that everything is working. Now these pumps should be moving the water, and because we have realistic water physics, that means it'll actually be draining this entire lake. All this water spilling out means that our lake will soon drain. I don't know about you guys, but I nerd out about this stuff so much. The idea that we actually made a machine that is genuinely going to drain a lake is so awesome. Also, I gotta say, I think it looks pretty cool too. The windmill with all these old-timey like gears and the pipes. I think it looks pretty amazing. And for only day 4, this is an awesome machine. It's a really good start to our 100-day playthrough. And soon our future machines will put this to shame. But before we get worried about all those nuclear fusion-y things, I got a hungry little belly here that's got to be filled up. And tea leaves, tea leaves are just the best. First of all, you can just cook them here in the campfire to get tea. But we can do even better with them. By adding dandelions to it with a little bit of water, we can make dandelion tea, which is actually a decent food source. Luckily, we have some of those. All we need now is to get a little bit of clay cooked up into bricks. Meanwhile, I see this bad boy, Earl Grey tea, my second favorite tea next to green tea, and all we need is an orange. Unfortunately for right now, that's just going to have to be a dream. We'll have to wait for that one. Now we get a little fresh water, add it right into our pot with the tea and the dandelions, and soon we get dandelion tea. Our first decent food source, which rewards us with another 2 hearts. Not too bad. I can already tell by day 5 that the water level in the entire lake is massively draining. It's about half a block down everywhere I look. It's already completely changed the look of this lake, and I gotta say, this is really fun. I love how this thing is just draining in the background. Although I gotta say, I'm immediately humbled, because my lake is only half a block lower. This ravine, nature, has managed to completely sinkhole this entire ocean. Right now, I'm making a little channel so that I can take some more water out of the lake, taking advantage of the lower sea level. And I mean, it really has lowered. Look at this. It's barely covering the very top of the sand there. I honestly think it'd look cool if it wasn't so terrifying. Speaking of terrifying, I head down to do some mining where I see the real danger of this mod pack. Everywhere, and I mean everywhere underground, is immediately flooding. Every lake, ocean, and any source of water drains down here. Find a little redstone, well, that's some good news. Then I find some bad news. I can see the ocean draining a huge amount of water into this cave. I was literally just standing on dry land, and now this area has become a running underground river. I pop my head back onto the surface on day 6 to see that it is in fact raining. The water level is much, much lower, but soon I found out it's actually not my pumps. The sands have shifted, and a massive sinkhole has opened up. This has drained a lot of my water, which is good. That's what I wanted the whole time, but it's also completely flooded the mines underneath me. It's not all alarming though. I finally do manage to get my second crop, some spice leaf, planted. Oh, nope, I was wrong. It is still completely very much alarming because a crocodile has spawned at my dam. Looks like nature's fighting back here. What's worse yet is I lost him. I don't know where he went. And with all these mine shafts rapidly flooding, I decide to quickly take advantage and do some mining right now. And when I get back on the surface, I see that the landscape has already dramatically changed. I mean, look at this. Half of the lake has dried up. And I decide to help the drainage process, I can start to make these canals. This will help lead all the water towards the pipes where they'll be able to drain out. Although I am noticing that it's becoming less and less efficient. The reason for this is because alone, pumps can only take water from about 2 blocks high. This means I'm going to have to get a little creative, no pun intended, if I want to get all of the water out of the center of the lake. After all, I don't want it to fall down here where I'm mining. I want it to get pumped out into the other lake. Managed to find some andesite and quickly craft up a ton of andesite alloy. I'm going to need this. The idea is I'm going to make this huge shaft, ladies, calm down, and I'm going to run it all the way to the middle of the lake, where I put another pump, power this with the very long shaft, and I'll start to pump water from the center of the lake and get it running down towards my dam. But again, as I learned the hard way, the pipe system is really weird. It doesn't want to really pump more than a couple of blocks. Going uphill with water is not an easy task. I even tried to blunt force and make a ton of string, which I was going to use to make sails. I was going to up the power of the windmill to try to get more pumps going. I pretty quickly managed to double the size of the windmill blades and therefore doubling the power of the windmill. Unfortunately, it just doesn't matter. This is a problem that brute force isn't going to fix. I'm going to have to use my brain to solve this one. Even though I can get all of the pumps working and I can run 3 pumps at a time, no water is coming out the other end. Eventually, I just have to face the facts. I'm going to have to find out a new machine to get the water out before it completely floods all of my mine shafts. So, that night, we head out to that ravine, that big sinkhole, And sure enough, I hear all the water just flowing down into the ravine. That's not why I'm here, though. The reason I'm in the ocean is to get a little extra kelp. We're going to need this for our next machine. I head back home and start to cook some of it up. The zombies are hoping to get a little bit of sushi, but no, not today. I wish. Speaking of annoying mobs, the phantoms remind me why I should make a bed and go to sleep. When we wake up the next morning, we're really hangry. We've completely messed up our nutrition system. We have no carbs, and we're suffering from malnourishment, which is causing us to lose all of our extra hearts. The solution, of course, is going to be a slice of bread. No croissants for me today, but I do have a little bit of bone meal, which I can use on this wheat. Although I hate the idea of bone mealing up wheat, we're kind of desperate right here. So unfortunately, we're just going to have to do it. But to prevent me from ever needing to do it again, I use my hoe and clear out another little plot of land here so that we can start to grow some wheat. But first, I decide just to take the wheat we have, we make some bread, and after scarfing this thing down, we do in fact temporarily fix our carbs, even if it's only barely. I'm looking up into my recipes now to see if I don't have a better source of carbs from Pam's Harvestcraft. I see that we have Vegemite, which is disgusting. Get out of here, Australia. And I also see we have sweet potatoes. These things are as OP as the osmium, to be honest. You put these down, they can grow in any season, and they give you carbs and protein. Yes, please. So we immediately grow some, bone meal some up, then start to cook some. And just like that, we go from completely wrecked nutritions, where speaking of bone meal, I look like I could be a skeleton right now. And with just one sweet potato, we've immediately fixed our diet. Not too bad. Now, let's get back to the task at hand. We can put out one of these, a hose pulley. This basically has an infinite range. It can be lowered down with a hand crank, just like this. And as it goes all the way down to the bottom of the channels I've made, we get our achievement, Industrial Spillage, which once again lets me know that this works. And sure enough, the pumps are draining water even from the very bottom of the lake. Unfortunately, I had to break down that whole goofy long shaft system, but let's be honest, I was just compensating, and we set up the second pump with the second hose pulley. I dig a little further down, and then I lower this thing all the way down to the same level as the very bottom of the lake. Now, all that water will run right over here and very quickly be sucked up and pumped out to the other side. Now, I just need to dig this entire trench all the way back to the deepest part of the lake. I spend the rest of the night digging out the trenches and leading all the water to our dam. And I gotta say, by day 10, the entire landscape has been transformed. I mean, look at this. The whole lake has essentially been drained. All I have to do is dig a few more little trenches to try to connect as much of the water as I can, and voila, we have completely pumped this entire lake bone dry. Oh, and then of course we did that. You can't sneak up on me like that, little guy. Yeah, of course I would slap my only friend on this entire playthrough. Sorry, little bud. Putting aside my war crimes for another day, it's time to get started on our power production. So I look into what generators Mekanism has to offer. And I see a heat generator. This is one of the first items you can make and doesn't require any machines to craft up. So, with one osmium ingot and some vanilla items, we can make it right away. To run it properly, you need lava, which is one of the reasons I cleared out a good spot away from anything flammable to make it. Of course, now that means we actually have to find the lava. The bad news is that now I can see just how much water is pouring down into these caves. The problem is that the water collects even deeper down at the lower levels, so the levels that have diamonds are even harder to go mining. We managed to find this one. Yeah, that's right, just one. But this is going to make it much harder to find things like lava. Can't be too upset though. We did get diamonds, a ton of emeralds, and with this little guy's help, we get a ton of iron too. And finally, the real reason this guy is amazing. He gets us a sponge. I don't know how I'm going to use this, but with all the water, I'm sure it's going to come in handy. The next day, I pop my head out, and I realize that this is not going to be as easy as digging down to Y11 to get lava. This might actually be a challenge. So, I make this, a basic tank. This is kind of like Thermal Engineering's basic tank. It's amazing. It can hold up to 32 buckets. So, I decide to make two. I get to a higher advantage up here on the mountain, try to find lava, but no luck. I do manage to see how amazing this drained out lake looks. And before we go disappearing back into the mines, I decide I should probably be a little more prepared. I make some wool, and I combined it with some red dye from roses I found over here. And with this, we can make red wool. That's all you need to make the market. The reason that we're going to be crafting at the market is because 1, it'll force this little guy to hang out with me, and I won't be lonely, finally. But number 2, after this guy comes plummeting in, we should be able to buy some really important stuff. So, good news, right? We found all those emeralds. Time to buy some food so we're not malnourished. Nope, I spent all of my emeralds on the sponge and I'm broke. So, I'm off to find a dumpster behind a McDonald's. Maybe there'll be some chicken nuggets thrown out there. Who knows? Unfortunately, I have no such luck, and I continue the bad luck streak when I see just how low the ocean has got. It's now almost a full 2 blocks lower. This is really concerning. But unfortunately, I get distracted when I find this. In one of these frost gardens, there's a raspberry, so we immediately throw it down. That makes me feel pretty good. What makes me feel a little less good is after I go checking through all my drawers and cupboards, I find out that I have no bone meal. So I basically have 2 options. I could be patient and wait for the plants to grow, or I could go out and slaughter some innocent skeletons, and I think we all know which one I chose. With a little bit of bone meal in my hands, I run up and I start to power grow our first little fruit source. Now I have to figure out what's a good recipe that uses raspberries. Now Pam's Harvestcraft always has juice, which is a good safe way in case we don't have any other options. Luckily, we do have one slightly better option. We can use this mixing bowl with a little bit of ice to get a smoothie. Luckily, we're surrounded with mountains full of snow. Pretty soon, we start to get a bunch of snowballs, and in no time at all, we have our raspberry smoothies, perfect for the summer heat, and a good source of fruit to fully round out our nutrition, along with our veggies from our tea and our carbs and proteins from our sweet potatoes. So now, we've drained this lake, so hopefully there isn't too much water. We've actually gotten a bucket to get a decent amount of lava, and we fixed our nutrition, so hopefully we won't starve, and of course we have enough hearts to at least sort of keep us alive. It takes us all the way to day 12. I'm not doing too good here. I only managed to find like half a bucket of lava. We come across this and then, oops, the physics tricks me again and I accidentally get lava spilled on my feet. And I start to burn. And I keep on burning. And yeah, all that hard work to get all that health back, and I find a pretty good way to get rid of it almost immediately. Luckily, I also find a way to get this tank working, and with a bucket, we can pretty quickly fill it up with some lava. We only get about 1 1/3 buckets of lava, so we're going to have to keep on looking to get a little bit more. The reason this is such a big pain and it's so hard to find lava is that every place that has lava is immediately flooded and turned into cobblestone with all of this water. Every time I get close to Y11, I end up in a giant ravine full of water. But soon I dig into a wall and I manage to get a little area here. I get a bucket and empty out all the water, so now we just have a little spot with obsidian. Dig a little bit more and voila, we've mined up some lava. Pretty soon I can turn this tank into bucket mode and I can just swipe up bucket after bucket after bucket of lava. And pretty soon we get a full tank full of almost 32 buckets of lava. I try to memorize the coordinates and I see that it's lucky day 13 and I decide that maybe it's a bad idea to keep on messing with this lava. So let's get out of here. Speaking of bad luck on day 13, we find our next bit of diamonds. And now we actually have a decent amount here, dolomite, which might be my very favorite block in Create. I find a whole cave of this beautiful, pristine white stone. I am holding myself back here. I mean, I really want to break this iron pick, but I don't want to get stuck down here with a broken pick, so I decide to move on and find the surface first. Sure enough, I dig up into what I think is going to be the ocean, and I'm afraid I might drown. Then I get to the surface and I see something. It's actually directly underneath my lake. Now this is weird because there was a lot of water that fell on my face. And then I realize, in this mod pack, we have a mod called Flood. And it means that every once in a while, when it rains, every once in a while, a bucket of water will be dumped from the sky, continuing to flood our area. The Flood mod normally will drop water where source water used to be. That means everywhere in this lake that has a little bit of water could definitely get more flooding whenever it rains. Luckily, I'm seeing that the pump system is working pretty well. Yes, there's some water popping up here and there. It's a little concerning, but for right now, the dam is doing its job. So I stay focused on doing mine. I take my very first diamonds and make a pick. Then I try to figure out how will I make a weapon, since I think I really need one. Now, I look through all my options. This saber is normally one of my favorites. I'm trying to find a good one-handed weapon. On top of the saber, my favorite weapon, by far, that is still one-handed, is the hammer. This thing with 11 attack damage is amazing. but I do come across a spear. A spear is one-handed, and it has reach, and with 7 attack, it's actually still pretty effective. Plus, it only takes 1 diamond. I say, what's the worst that could happen? Let's try it. I craft up a pole, and then I only need to spend 1 of my diamonds to get my spear. So of course, now that we're combat ready with my new amazing diamond weapon, yeah, we spend the entire day farming. What else would we do? I get all my sweet potatoes and a ton of my tea. Then, that night, inside one of the trenches, I see a creeper. And sure enough, I find out that the range on this spear is amazing. You can attack from almost 2 full blocks further than you could with a sword. I love this thing, and I think I could get used to this. I decide to go to bed, thinking that this might get rid of the rain. And sure enough, it does. However, it doesn't get rid of the water. I see that the area directly underneath my lake is definitely flooded. And if there's any more water that pours in, the floods will start to overflow back up into the lake. So I have to be careful about that. The good news is, the rain stopped, and so is the flooding. Time to start to make our first real base. I'm going to be using this dolomite and setting up a few pillars. Now, I know I go to the lowest part of the lake, the one that is most in danger of flooding, but I do decide to make the entire platform a little bit elevated. Hopefully this will save us from any rogue waves. I begin to look over my machines and see what Mekanism is all about. I've never used Mekanism before, so you're going to get to learn along with me how everything works from the ground up. I was so inexperienced that I didn't even know what any of these machines did. I was looking for a redstone furnace, but I wasn't quite sure that the smelting factory was it. However, pretty soon I stumble across the energized smelter. I look at its description, pretty quickly I realize it is the basic machine and Mekanism that's used as a furnace. Perfect, exactly what I want. Unfortunately, it does not take vanilla items to build. I need to figure out how to make that computer chip so that this will actually work. I see that that is done in a metallurgic infuser. The metallurgic infuser is another pretty simple machine. It's pretty much vanilla with a little bit of osmium as well, so we can make this pretty quickly. At the end of day 14, I head out and I start to build up my dolomite platform, which is where my base will be. This is where we're going to set down our heat generator. The heat generator works pretty simply. It will generate power whenever it's touching something hot. That's why it's ideal to set it up a block higher. You want to make it kind of on a pedestal like this with a spot directly underneath it. This area right here is where we're going to put a bucket of lava. Right now, I decided to take my tank of lava and I set it right here off to the side. I get a bucket and place our first bit of lava. Now, directly on top of it, touching it, is where we'll put the heat generator. Now, we just have to get lava on the other 4 sides, which is a little bit tough. This means we're basically going to have to build kind of like a dolomite sarcophagus around this thing. We build up 2 more blocks. This way, we're making a little bit of space on all 4 sides where we can put the lava in. Then, obviously, we have to build up some walls around this so the lava doesn't go flowing out everywhere. Pretty soon, though, we have 4 little spots where we'll be adding all of our lava. As you can see right here, this machine is producing about 2 Fe per tick with just that 1 bucket of lava. Yes, I'm aware that is pretty pathetic, but hey, it's at least a good start. It's consistent, free energy. And we start to add all of our lava, and pretty soon, I see that it has quickly jumped up to just about 21 Fe per tick. We can do a little bit better though, if we get lava directly on top of it. And by the start of day 15, we have the entire sarcophagus filled with lava now on top. In total, we can now make about 30 Fe per tick. Not too bad for a free energy source. And yes, the irony is not lost on me, how because this is dolomite, it almost looks like an igloo, like it looks like a frozen ball, and yet it is full of lava inside. It works. At least I think it works. We should probably test this out to see if we can actually make anything. The metallurgic infuser should be your very next machine. Of course, you're still watching the Captain's TV, and that means I'm always going to put my tummy before my brain. We take a little break here, and I buy myself a grape seed. This is a fruit that will grow throughout the summer and the fall, which we'll have if the season starts to change. Okay, back on task. Let's make that metallurgic infuser. We get that 1 piece of osmium, and pretty soon, with just 2 furnaces, we get this bad boy crafted. Now, I've played Nuclear Craft before. I know that we should probably make some kind of cables so we can run power from the power source to all of our machines. Unfortunately, that takes steel. we just can't make steel yet. We head back over to our very primitive little factory. With no cables, we just have to plug this thing directly into the generator. But it's okay, because that works just fine. We put some iron in, now we just have to put in some coal, and this thing sucks all the coal right up, turning it into carbon. And now, as you can hear that humming going along, our machines are finally working, and we're making some progress towards some amazing technologies. From this point, the iron will be turned into enriched iron. Then we just have to run that through the machine again with a little more coal to get steel. It's going to take some time, so let's go off and get a little bit more coal and a little bit more iron. Of course, some osmium will be nice too, and might as well get some more. You know what, let's just go for a whole day of mining. We finally get our way back home and check out our machines. Sure enough, we can load it full of carbon, and it does take a lot of carbon. And soon, we can see that we've got a decent amount of enriched iron. I decide to take out the iron we have and put the enriched iron here to see if we actually start to get some steel. Sure enough, it starts to crank out a little pile of steel dust. Now I know we're doing this all right. So we just have to cook up our first steel inside of a regular furnace. Now we just have to figure out how do we get these computer chips. However, they're still going to be made in that metallurgic infuser. Instead of carbon though, we have to put redstone in it. I start to cook up some osmium, then I start to cook up that steel. Now I'm realizing, with this very first steel, I could use it to make a steel chassis. The steel chassis is the core component in almost every machine in Mekanism. While I'm waiting for that glass to cook up, in the meantime, I take a little bit more iron and run it through the metallurgic infuser. After all, we want to use up all this carbon, 420, nice, because I definitely don't want to dump it and waste it. We get the steel chassis, which is great, but like I said, without those computer chips, we're just going to have to wait for all this carbon to get processed in the metallurgic infuser. But as you're all very well aware, patience is not my strong suit. So instead of waiting, I come up with another idea. Let's make another heat generator so we have a second power source. We crank this bad boy up because you know I like it hot. And after throwing down a few more grapes, we focus away another little fanboy. As soon as we make the second heat generator, we'll have some extra power so that we can power another metallurgic infuser. This time, we'll be using redstone inside of it. So, craft up 2 more furnaces, and sure enough, we get the metallurgic infuser numero dos. But here we go once again, being very, very careful with our lava. I want to place this infuser so that it's actually sharing this little bit of lava right here. I put it down, then I have to take the lava off of the top, break this one open, and then put lava so that it's now being shared between these two. Next, we have to make another igloo just like we did with the first one so that we can get as much lava touching as many sides of the generator as possible. I'm pretty sure right there you can kind of see what I did wrong, but don't worry, I figured it out later. You don't have to blow me up in the comments. At least not for this. I do a ton of other stuff that you can save that comment for. For now, we are getting a little more energy in this infuser, and even though it's not totally set up yet, we can get this started. We could try to get our computer chips, even though yes, the energy is a little bit tight here. We managed to get at least one. Pretty soon, we get our second cooking too. And as much as I love the first few steps of any tech mod, the lack of energy here is already starting to get a little frustrating. However, I'm not too frustrated, not for long, because I'm starting to learn about a factory. Basically, Mekanism has a lot of really creative ways to upgrade your machines, and a basic factory is an upgraded version of an energized smelter. I see that infused alloy is once again another recipe made inside of the metallurgic infuser, once again with redstone, this time with iron. So for right now, the best thing I can focus on is getting that second heat generator up and fully running. I managed to make a nice little spot here where I can put my third little bit of lava, and pretty soon I'm getting ready to put lava up here on the top. But, yep, that's right, I just now caught it. I didn't put any lava underneath this heat generator, so I had to fix that quickly too. But what is pretty smart is finally making this energized smelter, one of my favorite machines. And of course I want to put lava down here, but with the realistic physics I have to be really careful. It could start to flow, so I make a little dam here, put it down, and then put an extra block here to force it back in. Now I can put the lava back on the top of both of the generators, and now we have 2 fully powered up heat generators. Hopefully this can get us a little bit of progress. Now I'm really tempted to put this new smelter right here, but I decide I definitely want to have both these metallurgic infusers going, one for carbon and one for redstone, so instead I'm going to try something different. I put the metallurgic fuser back in place, and I put more redstone in here, and the reason is I really need to get a few more computer chips for the next project. I decide I'm going to go ahead and skip past the basic energized smelter and get the basic smelting factory instead. This thing is amazing. So I, once again, for like the third time, break out this infuser. Now I'm super tempted to put the brand new smelting factory in its place. But I decide that maybe it's finally time to put this engineer brain to use, and I decide to do something a little bit smarter. I make a cable. Now we can run this cable directly out of the heat generator. This will kind of work like a power strip. And now, instead of just plugging one machine directly into the heat generator, we'll be able to use this and plug in whatever machines we want directly onto this green strip here. Once again, I decide to add on the metallurgic infuser right here. Now we'll have two of them right next to each other. But of course, I think we all know what's coming next, and I immediately plug in the basic smelting machine. Look at this thing. It's amazing. Yes, it will let you smelt ores automatically without using any coal, but at the same time, you can now smelt 3 things at once. The only thing is, it doesn't double your ores, and that's something I really like to do in tech mods, so we'll have to figure that out next. So while I should be super happy to have this really amazing machine, maybe one of the best I've ever had, you know me, being satisfied just isn't my style. So I start to look up iron dust. I want to see how we can get one ore turned into multiple iron dust. Sure enough, I find it, the enrichment chamber. Luckily, it's not too complicated either. All we have to do is now cook up some glass. And check this out. You can separate it and be cooking 3 times as fast as you normally could. Pretty amazing. We just grab ourselves a little bit of osmium. Then, on the way back to my lab, that crocodile from day 1 decides he isn't done with me yet. Luckily, with this range, I can get some good pokes in. He still manages to get me, but just barely I get away. Man, little guy. He's really going the extra mile for that extra sale. I respect it. So, I pull a few crocodile teeth out of my butt, and pretty soon we get the steel chassis, which gets us the enrichment chamber. And I add this machine on the power grid next. So, let's test it out. The idea is 1 piece of iron here should turn into 2 iron dust. Sure enough, we got it. That means we now have the ability to double all of our ores. I then peek into the configuration tab. Pretty quickly I figure out how I can double ores in one machine and automatically have it pushed into the smelter. This is already an amazing setup. Now, if I really want to be smart, what I would do is put a chest at the bottom of this entire thing. So that's what I do, minus the smart part. Putting it down there means I couldn't open it up. So instead, we stick it on the front, go into the configuration tab, and say that the front will be an output. And sure enough, pretty soon, everything that's made in the smelter is automatically injected into this. Now this chest will collect everything that we smelt, automatically. Machine's looking pretty good. And once again, I was already starting to notice some problems. We were just about maxing out the power for this setup, and we weren't even using the infusers either. The smelting factory completely went offline. We might be in trouble here. We're definitely going to have to find a way to make some more power fast. I made an energy tablet, because I was going to have to experiment with some way to make more power. Then I used that to make a configurator, which is kind of like the wrench version for mechanisms. I was hoping that I could fix this pipe, but I actually figured out I'd used the wrong pipe to begin with. Pipes are for fluid, cables are to transfer power, tubes are to transfer gases, and what I'm looking for is called a logistical transporter. It does take a computer chip, which isn't too terrible. Pretty soon, we have a logistical tube that should be able to transfer items. I get one crafted up and attach it, and right away, I can see that this is working much better. Still though, when I put items in here, they're not quite going down. I actually have to use the configurator so that I make it a pull pipe. That way things will be pulled down into the enrichment chamber, completing this miniature little setup and making me a very happy cappy. Now, whenever I put an ore up here, it will automatically be pulled into this pipe, put in the enrichment chamber where it will be doubled, then moved over to the smelter where it will get automatically smelted with no fuel and end up in this chest, which is very quickly going to become Captain's little booty. And this setup right here is the #1 reason I play tech mods. I love it. Of course, I'd love it a little bit more if it wasn't choking every few seconds and running out of power. I don't think we're quite ready for a fission reactor, so let's check out some solar panels. Solar panels don't take anything too crazy, but it is going to be a little bit of osmium to get a couple of them running. I decide in the meantime, I'm going to make a quick fix, and instead I'll be running this power cord so that both heat generators will be powering all the machines at once. That does help out quite a bit. And yes, I can see that the power bar is still definitely struggling, but I prefer to ignore that. just like I'm ignoring the receding sea levels, which I'm sure neither of those will come back to be any trouble in the future. And now that I have all the machines set up, and the very beginnings of our laboratory are looking pretty good, we send in all of our ores. This will kind of be a mini stress test here. We'll see just how far we can get before we really start to run out of power. So yes, it's time to stop being lazy. I can no longer try to mess with my machines. I just have to get into the mines and start finding some more osmium. We jump into the mines, the very, very flooded mines. And so, of course, Captain finds a pretty quick way to kill himself. I'm actually kind of proud of this one. If we didn't have all these extra hearts from the nutrition mod, we would have definitely died to the rising water right there. But just like a drowned cockroach, we keep on going. Back on the surface, I see this stunning glowing boy, and I figure nobody can look better than me, so I'm gonna have to put an end to it. But after getting shot at and drowned all day, I decide I'm gonna go to bed and pass the night away. I don't need any more mobs in my life. And while I am a total failure, at least that's what my mom says, we did manage to succeed in getting the osmium we were looking for the whole time. Unfortunately, there's still more failure to come, because this little creeper right here manages to blow a huge hole in our lake. One, he blew up our walls, which kind of sucked, but he also made this giant hole here, which is not being drained properly and filling up with water. Luckily, the number one thing that can bring you back to life is, of course, a grape flavored smoothie. I mean that quite literally. I gained 2 more hearts and actually have more life. But no matter how many hearts I have, I still have no redstone. Eventually, I have to face the truth and go back into the mines. So I put all of my stuff into this chest that belongs to Mekanism to keep myself at least a little bit organized. Not normally what the captain does, but I'm trying something new here. And of course, it starts to rain again. As you can see right out there, occasionally, buckets of water will start to collect. Remember, the flood mod will make it so that, well, we start to flood. So of course, it's now raining and dark, so what better time to build solar panels? I start to look into the recipe, but once again, I see that I'm gonna need, yeah, you guessed it, more redstone. I gotta be honest, I'm pretty frustrated. I can't build any new machines. So I do what any frustrated engineer does. I take all of my food and throw it directly into the industrial processor. And this is how we're gonna be cooking our food from now on, I guess. Sure, there won't be any side effects there, although, to be honest, judging by my gameplay, I don't think I have to worry too much about killing off any brain cells. So I should be okay to move on to my next little plan, which involves making a steel pickaxe. And now I'm getting ready to go into the mines. I also really like that we found some redstone. I don't like the lava. With water physics, this stuff actually flows at me pretty dangerously, and I kind of never know when I'm safe. Speaking of water drainage, I find some water, and with water physics, the water will rush in and you can very quickly drown no matter where you are. I have to be really careful and make sure that I always know where some fresh air is at all times. Despite my best efforts, no matter where I go, water always comes rushing in. Remember, redstone is pretty deep down in the earth, and this is where the water gets the worst. Everywhere I go is just flooding, and it's really dangerous. This is honestly one of the most dangerous things about this mod pack. I do drag my waterlogged self back to my base on day 22, but unfortunately my woes are not at an end, because now all of my machines are absolutely zapped of power. I mean, we are running on 0 right here. On the bright side, my sweet potatoes cooked up, so that's good. I take all my ores and I add them to this large chest, but they're not going to be processed without any power. So we have to immediately start to look into those solar panels. With some redstone, I thought it was going to be pretty easy. Turns out there's still quite a lot we got to do. We're going to need a lot of osmium, glass, and we're going to need some infused alloys. Luckily, I've made quite a few of these. So with that, we can get a ton of these solar panels. You use 3 of these to actually get a solar generator. Fortunately, those take a little bit of gold, and I'm not doing too great on gold. I have mined up about 5 ore here though, and I immediately shove that to the front of the list so it gets enriched first. I turn off some of my machines so that all the power will go into making gold, and pretty soon we do manage to get our first solar generator. So I get some cables and I get ready to set it up, and of course, just my luck, the sun is already setting. But it doesn't really matter. I at least have to get this set up so that it's ready for tomorrow. But unfortunately, it's not producing that much energy. Yeah, I wonder why. So strange that the solar panel isn't working in the middle of the night. Although I do set this up, and hopefully it'll be ready by tomorrow. We still have about 25 solar panels and a lot of time to kill before the sun rises. So I'm trying to figure out if I can make any more solar panels. Sure enough, the gold is very slowly being crafted up, and I managed to get 3 more solar panels. Now, if I cannibalize this one I made, I can actually make an advanced solar array. This might actually be pretty useful. I don't waste any time at all. I want to set these things out as quick as I can. Thing is, this whole area where my lab is, eventually it will become like an indoor factory. So I'm going to take the solar panels and put them out back directly on the floor of the lake bed. Set them down, and I start to run some of our universal cables out the back, hopefully getting them connected to the solar array. Now, we just have to wait to daytime and see if they're actually worth all the materials it took to build them. There it is. A sight for sore eyes indeed. Of course, this is a sight for sore ears. I don't know. Anyway, that sound makes me very happy because it lets me know the solar panel is working. Now I'm looking and it doesn't look like it's generating too much power, at least at first. The fact is, most of this power is already being diverted into the machines. I get back into my lab and I see the good news. This smelter is at full power. So is the enricher, so is both the infusers. The factory is now at 100%. And with this good news, finally, I can break down the enrichment chamber, and with the redstone I've collected, I can upgrade this bad boy. Let's make a basic enriching factory. In the exact same way that the smelting factory could take 3 ores at once, this can enrich and double 3 ores at once. Then, once those are turned into dust, all 3 of them will move over into the smelting factory, meaning that now we can double our ores and cook them at 3 times the speed. Pretty quickly, the chest empties out of ores. The enricher fills up, and the smelter's full of dust, which means this chest is looking pretty good too. Already on day 23. You guys play Mechanisms? I really suggest you try to go for a setup like this first, because boy is it a good start. The start of day 25, it continues to rain. I think it's now been raining off and on for almost like 10 days. I'm a little worried that the flooding might start to affect us, so I make sure to always be checking on my dam. Luckily, everything's going well over here, and water's still being pumped out into the other dam. And even though the sky is obviously full of clouds, we get the good news. The solar panels are fully producing a ton of energy. Now, I take a stack of redstone, and I'm going to run it through the enrichment chamber. Doing this will get us 8 times as much redstone when put into the metallurgic infuser. Now, I take my tank full of lava and put some here to get some obsidian. That's when I see it. Some water actually spawned and flooded over here, turning this into obsidian. That was a good thing. I wanted the obsidian. I'm not so sure I want the flooding though. Now, with the 2 diamonds, the book, and a little bit of obsidian, whether we like it or not, we can make our enchantment table, which gets us just a little bit closer to that silk touch that we need so desperately. I decide I'm going to set it over here and turn my bedroom into a little bit of a study. I check and see that there's only efficiency, no silk touch yet. Let's set down some of these bookshelves and see if they don't help us out a little bit. We only have 7 for right now, so we're not going to get to full level 30s, but this might help. Sadly, after I run through my first 2 picks, they only end up with just efficiency 2. No silk touch for us. Turns out, we're just going to have to get the bookshelves. Now, I head out into the fall leaves to try to find a cow. I really need leather. Then, sadly, we killed this little Tasmanian devil. I was hoping he'd have leather, but no good. I just kind of feel bad about that one, if I'm being honest. However, seeing this makes me feel so much worse. This is right around the area that we spawned in. It used to be dry land. And now I can see this torrent of flooding water filling this area up, making it a lake. I see it pouring out from the tall mountains, and I know that soon it's going to flood so much more. And my base is just over the hill. As the day ends, I might have to keep an eye on this area because it might start to flood. It's a good thing we made the base a little bit elevated, and hopefully we don't have to worry about this for now. My only answer is going out and killing zombies, trying to get a good stack of rotten flesh, because I can throw rotten flesh into a smelter and get leather in this mod pack. On my way back to the dam, I'm seeing there's actually quite a bit of water that's spawning in the lake bed. This place is really starting to flood with all the rain coming down. Now I'm starting to realize the event on day 25 was almost certainly that huge torrent of water that's pouring in. I'm still feeling pretty confident that we'll be able to drain it at this dam if anything goes too crazy. Sure enough, on the way back home, I see that a couple of little squares that I left have also flooded. But in the back of my mind, I know as long as the water ends up in these trenches and heads down to the pumps, I should still be okay. At least that's what I'm hoping. I get my leather, turn some sugarcane into paper, and get a few more books. But we're still going to need a couple more. We get our enchantment table up to 21, And I'm tempted to try to get Silk Touch, but I decide I should just wait until I get the full 30 library. So, we're heading out to the ocean. And when we finally get out to the sea, I see, I didn't mean to do that on purpose, I promise, but I lay my eyes on the fact that the water level is still receding, which we might still have to emergency dump the water into the ocean. For now, we get the seaweed, which we can turn into paper in Pam's Harvestcraft, which is enough to get us enough books, to get us enough bookshelves, so that we can finish up our library. But now with the bookshelf there, it's a little bit cramped. I come down here to get some dolomite when I see this little guy. Aw, little kid with a shiv. It's like being in the London Underground. Sadly, I have to put him out of his misery. Oh, looks like Papa's coming too. What's that? You want to go join him in heaven? Oh, I don't know if that's where you're going, but okay. While sending a family to heaven isn't great, getting a little extra rotten flesh is. However, the Minecraft gods have punished me for my hubris and are very quickly flooding these areas. I was down here like 10 days ago, and this whole area was totally open and full. I get back to the surface to see that it is still raining, and there's still more flooding happening, so I kind of have to move quickly here. We get a lot of enriched redstone, which is great, and we start to cook up our rotten flesh, so it's not all bad news. Put down our last bookshelf. Now we see we're 28. We're getting close. We still need one more. Sure enough, we get those books, and that bookshelf, throw it in the back. Now we should be able to get Silk Touch. And then by the very beginning of day 27, we get it. Silk Touch, Efficiency 4 and Unbreaking. Not too bad. What we don't need is more water. And as I start to peek my head over here, I'm getting a little bit worried because it seems like every time I walk through here, there's a few more puddles. Can't focus on that now because I've got these diamonds. Turns out we actually hit the jackpot here. This is a huge deal. In Yoon's mine shafts, sometimes there'll be an area with cobblestone that has a random ore. It just so happens that this random ore was diamond. That means we're going to get an entire chunk of diamond right here. We're not getting 8, not even 10. In fact, by the time we're done, we've gotten a full mine shaft. I think we get somewhere around 29 diamond ore. Remember, this is silk touched ore, not just the diamonds. We're going to be able to take this ore back to our machines and process it, and hopefully get double diamonds, which is really good news. What I am upset about is the fact that this mine shaft is now flooding. Seriously, there used to be no water here at all. Now it's like 5 blocks deep and quickly filling up. I run back to my machines and we throw in our very first ore. Sure enough, we get 2 diamonds. That means now that we have Silk Touch, every time we find diamonds, we can double them. That's massive. I mean, not to mention the fact that we already have 29 diamond ore. We're going to almost have a full stack of diamond ore just like that. I quickly throw it in, along with the gold and the emeralds. Now that we've found all this amazing stuff, now that we have all these diamonds, we're going to be able to get to the next level of Mekanism and start to infuse diamonds into some of our machines. In the metallurgic infuser, you can use diamond dust to upgrade your infused alloys to get up to the next level of alloy, reinforced alloy. This will be a core component in a lot of the machines going forward. And if we really want to go to the next level, we can do atomic alloys, but we have to get reinforced alloys first. I'm looking through my recipes trying to figure out how to use refined obsidian when this guy comes up and he tries to pickpocket me. I don't blame him. I am becoming fairly opulent. Speaking of opulent, some of the recipes I'm looking at are insanely expensive, needing tons of diamond to make. One of these super expensive recipes is going to be our digital miner. Luckily, before I waste any, I do see that we should be making diamonds into enriched diamonds, which will give us 8 times the amount of infused diamonds. So that was a lucky catch. And we are definitely going to need a lot of diamonds in order to make this digital miner, so it's a good thing I found that. We're going to have to head into the enricher and put a ton of diamonds to get a ton of enriched diamond. But for right now, maybe we just start with 1 and just test things out. Sure enough, we get 80 millibuckets of diamond, which is pretty impressive because 1 diamond alone would only get us 10 millibuckets. Or at least that's what I think. I don't know, I'm not going to test it. You guys can go find out for yourself. For me, I'm going to enrich all my diamonds first. Finally, now that we have some diamond in the infuser, I throw some of my infused alloys to try to upgrade them to reinforced alloy. I look ahead to see that we're going to need enriched, refined obsidian for the next atomic alloy. So, how do I get that? Well, sure enough, step 1 is that we're going to need even more diamond. So, I decide to plunk one in here and get a little bit more refined diamond. And I get a good hint that we're doing everything right because we get our very first reinforced alloys. Not too bad. we get our next little piece of enriched diamond, and of course we throw it right back into the infuser, but this time we're not going to put an infused alloy in here. We're going to put some crushed obsidian. That's how you get refined obsidian. Obsidian dust inside the infuser with diamond. Refined obsidian is one of the strongest alloys, so I'm all about getting this. Put a little bit of obsidian in the infuser with the diamond, and of course, as promised, we get our very first refined obsidian dust. Not too bad. Now, what is kind of bad is the situation with the water here. It's looking like things are seriously starting to flood. Unfortunately, I'm a little too excited because we're getting just that much closer to making our digital miner. Now, we just need to take some refined obsidian and mix it with the reinforced alloy. Yeah, I know it's a little bit confusing, but I think I've got this figured out. We take some of the refined obsidian, put it in the enrichment chamber, we get a little pellet of that, and then put that back into the infuser. Then we take our reinforced alloy, then throw that in the infuser with some of the refined obsidian in the infusing slot. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't really understand like 80% of what I said there, but I got lucky because it all turned out to be right. We get our very first atomic alloy, one of the toughest in Mekanism. And now we only need 2 more atomic alloy, and we can get this amazing machine. At least that's what I hope. Now that we've got the first 2 atomic alloy, I decide to move on to the logistical sorter. Thank God, this is much cheaper. It's just a computer chip or 2, a little bit of iron, and a piston. Of course, I don't have any wood for the piston, so I did have to go out and cut down a few trees. Doesn't matter. We get the logistical sorters done, and another 2 pieces of our digital miner are finished. Now that I've made those 2 simpler components, I get back to one of the more expensive ones, the robot. The robot needs 2 of these refined alloys. In order to make one, you need refined dust compressed with obsidian. In order to do that, we need the osmium compressor. The osmium compressor is a little bit more complicated, but it's not too intimidating, and I think we might be able to do this too. We take some of our infused alloy, we combine 2 of those with 2 computer chips, and pretty soon we get an advanced computer chip. We need 2 of these. Then we need 4 infused alloy, 2 more buckets, and to finish it all off, a steel casing. Pretty soon with all that, we get our very first osmium compressor. Very creatively, I just dump it right here on the end, and pretty soon I hook it up to the power system as well. We put our very first piece of refined obsidian dust, and we get our very first refined obsidian ingot, one of the best ingots I've ever seen in Minecraft. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get to use it. It's going to go towards the little robot, who also needs 1 more of those atomic alloys, so we start to craft 1 too. He's also going to need 2 energy tablets, which is more gold. I told you this was expensive. And he's going to need a personal chest. After we get that atomic alloy, I see that we still have a little bit of refined obsidian, so I make 1 more atomic alloy. We take a little bit of the refined redstone, plop that down here, and start to make a couple more computer chips. That computer chip, combined with 2 chests, some steel and glass, gets a personal chest, which is kind of like a shulker box, which again, sadly, I don't get to use because it also is going to go into crafting the robot. But it's all worth it because eventually we do get him. And now, with that super expensive component done, I was feeling pretty good. Like the hardest stuff was out of the way. Right? Ah, come on now. You already know if Captain says that, we're in trouble. Turns out the last 2 components, the teleportation core, might be the 2 most expensive components. Because not only do they take diamonds, gold, and lapis, they take 2 atomic alloy each. 2 each. Which means we're going to have to craft up at least 4 more. So I put a little bit more refined obsidian in to get it enriched and get ready to infuse it with even more refined alloy. If you're confused, dude, think about me. I am so confused. But with all the confusion aside, somehow, we were right. So we can get our second teleportation core right away, and in no time at all, we have this new amazing machine, the digital miner. Now I'm just trying to find a good spot to set it down. I decide, instead of putting it out in the open, let's put it right here inside the base. At least it'll be safe here. Which means pretty soon, I run that cable up to the rest of the machines, and this thing has power. So let's just honestly take a real view into Captain's brain right now. I don't really know what auto eject means. I think that means it poops everything out. Auto pull? No idea. Completely in the dark. All I really know is silk touch. But hopefully, for the first use of my machine, that won't really matter. I set the config to an extremely narrow 7 blocks in radius. and then I try to make it only mine the very surface area. I try to figure out my coordinates and realize that the ground is right at 60, so I configure it to only mine down to that level. This means that hopefully the drill will mine out the immediate area directly underneath us. You can see the glowing area, that's where the visuals are showing this is the area that will be mined. I set it a little bit bigger at 10, and then I set the minimum radius down to something like 50, so it'll only mine down the first 10 blocks below us. Then I put something in that's extremely crucial for anybody who's going to use this mod. You type in forge:/ores and save that as a tag filter. Then it will start to mine up everything that counts as an ore in this game. However, by turning the inverse on, it will mine everything that's not an ore, basically becoming like an automatic digging machine, which is exciting. That's exactly what I want. The exact thing I don't want is more water pouring over from the mountains. Every once in a while I peek and see a few more buckets pouring in. I might have to hurry here. Luckily, the machine is doing exactly what I want. It's mining out all of the cobblestone from directly underneath us and opening up a giant cave. At least I hope that's what's happening. It doesn't look like it's doing anything right now, other than sucking down a ton of energy. Apparently, when you turn on Silk Touch, it makes the energy consumption insanely high, which is great if you're mining things like diamond and coal. With this Silk Touch coal, we can put this in the enricher, and sure enough, just like you might predict, we can double our coal output. That is pretty useful. I don't know if it's worth all the power though. It really increases the rate of power consumption. And this thing is sucked dry of energy before it can even start. I actually checked to see just how much energy is being consumed. 240 with Silk Touch on, and only 40 with it off. It increases it by 200 RF. That's 6 times as much energy. That's crazy. For the moment, I'm not going to be able to be mining any ores. I have to go just turning this into a regular digger. I can turn off Silk Touch and you get just cobblestone for way, way cheaper, 6 times cheaper on energy. And with that, this thing actually has a decent amount of energy and should be able to work consistently. We're not getting diamonds or anything great like that, but this will have to do for right now. I even try to program it with diamonds, but it's no good. It has to actually be the ore. In addition, I actually program it so it will take out the sand as well, and then I even set it up so it's taking out the dirt, hopefully completely clearing out all of the top sand and soil. Sure enough, after a little bit of configuring and turning off the visuals, we can actually see the machine working live. It's taking out all of these little chunks and it's automatically digging for us. It's pretty impressive, I'll admit. Just taking out a few blocks of dirt is not exactly super cool, but it does show just how strong this machine could be if we learn how to configure it appropriately. Basically, I'm getting this machine to do all the boring stuff for me. It's pretty amazing. I do see that it's actually about a block too wide poking out of my base, so I go back to change the radius again when I see this, cobblestone. That's right, I changed it so now it's actually eating my base. It's taking chunks of my base out because I put it all the way up to 61. Big mistake. I almost could have lost my entire base. Remember, some of this dolomite is holding in the lava. This could have been a huge disaster. I turn the machine off and quickly replace all the blocks that were broken out. I check one more time to make sure that hopefully it's actually getting the right area. And this time, it is working. It's only taking out the sand and the dirt directly below us. Not very quickly though. And of course, you know me, the captain, the first thing I'm going to look for is how to make this a little bit faster. We're going to do a little bit of hands-on science here, make a few speed upgrades, and see just how much energy consumption is increased whenever we do this. In order to make a speed upgrade, you need osmium dust. Unfortunately, my whole setup actually immediately converts all the dust into ingots, so I don't have any dust on me right now. This is kind of a problem. Unfortunately, I have a visit from a few unwanted interns begging me for some college credits, and I get the hint. I think maybe it's time to go to bed. We'll save all the science for the daytime. We'll fight crime at night. Finally, on day 30, one of the funniest things I've ever seen happens. The digging machine actually dug out the cable connecting it. It basically decided that living the rest of its life with me as its owner wasn't worth it and unplugged itself. That is the funniest thing, legit the funniest thing I've ever seen. Pulling the plug was the better option. But I quickly remind the machine that if I have to live through this horrible nightmare that is life, so does it, and I plug it back in to get it going again. I go in really quickly and reconfigure the machine. I make 59 the maximum height it can get to, so it will stop chewing out pieces of the base, including itself. Now, let's try to figure out how to get that osmium dust. I look around and I see that the best option right now is probably the crusher. The crusher is a pretty simple item that can take ingots and just about everything and crush it down into dust. In order to make the crusher, we're going to need buckets of lava. Luckily, we have those. Unluckily, we also have buckets and buckets of flooding water now pouring over the mountainside into our lake. Yeah, sadly, I can't deny that anymore. It's really evident. There's a lot of water pouring in. This means that the pumps over at the dam are really going to be tested. We take the lava, and we do manage to get our crusher, another machine to add to our assembly line. I decide for the first time we're going to take this one off the line and actually put it in the back. I can't imagine the crusher's too useful, so this is going to be one of the more niche machines. I go down to check its progress, and I'm immediately distracted. There's quite a lot of water pouring in. All of the canals are filling up. Water is running off of my base, and look at the mountainside. Buckets are pouring into the lake bed. I don't know if my little pumps are going to be able to keep up. This could be bad. I don't know, Gobbler the Goblin. We might be in trouble on this one. The good news is I can hear that the digger is actually digging. Now let's go see if we have some bad news. Let's go check on these pumps to see just how crazy the water situation is getting. I can now see that it is in fact flooding over, like a river pouring into this lake. Tons of water, tons of buckets per second are now pouring into my lake. I only have 2 pumps running. I don't think that this can empty out in time. Now we rush over to check on the dam. Sure enough, I see that all the water is getting into these trenches, and it's running all back to the dam, which is sucking buckets out pretty quickly. And I gotta say, even though we made this on like day 4, this dam is proving to be one of the most powerful machines, and it is sucking a ton of water out and keeping us safe. I look at the far side of the dam, and sure enough, it's throwing buckets out. It almost looks like it's throwing out 2 buckets every second, which is a really good rate, but I can't imagine that that's keeping up with the intense amount of water that's pouring into the lake. It seems like this water must be going somewhere. I just don't know where. I look back to see where all the canals are going, and sure enough, the water level is still pretty low. And so I assume, pretty foolishly, that everything is okay. I go back and check on my digital miner. Even with all of this crazy flooding, I actually think my machines are working pretty well, so I continue ahead doing a little bit more work. We get some redstone into the infuser and some iron and quickly start to make an entire stack of infused alloy. We're going to need them. Then, the first few speed upgrades we make, we put them into the infuser so that we can make more speed upgrades. However, I'm checking to see just how efficient they are, and they're nothing like Nuclear Craft. 3 speed upgrades only increases the efficiency by about 2.37. In Nuclear Craft, it was exponential. The number of speed upgrades you put in massively increased how fast it went. Here, we put in a total of 7 upgrades, and it gets to 7.5, which is pretty good, but still not nearly as efficient as the old speed upgrades in Nuclear Craft. On top of that, these really do begin to drain a lot of power. And even this little tiny infuser is now choking and running out of power, which is a little bit concerning. I mean, also remember, it's nighttime, our solar panels aren't working, so that's one thing too. I do go ahead and make a total of 11 speed upgrades, and I get ready to distribute them to all the machines, but I see that the digger is already running out of power, so yeah, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to wait till tomorrow, and maybe wait until we have more power. What we need to do, just like in real life with solar energy, is we need to find a way to store the power that is created during the daytime to sustain us through the night. So of course, we need a battery. And in Mekanism, our version of the battery is the energy cube. It does take a little bit of gold to create itself, but in no time we get our first basic energy cube, and I get ready to set it up on the power line. So instead of trying to mess around with this cable, I decide to go directly towards the source. Now I'm going to set the energy cube directly in between the solar array and the base. This way, all the energy that is being charged up in the solar array will go into this battery. I can see it's already working. We're getting a little bit of charge. Now we just have to set it up so that all the extra charge will go down the line and into the base. The good news is we've now officially configured it so the solar panel will immediately charge the battery and the battery will immediately send all of its energy into the base, which is perfect. What's not so perfect is the amount of water that's building up underneath said base, and I'm going to have to figure out a way to get rid of all this water. Before we deal with that, I do decide to make some energy upgrades. I can now see with that battery that even in the daytime, even with full solar energy, we're still being run dry. I fill up the digger with all 8 out of 8 energy upgrades, and I see that we now have 10 times the efficiency. That is much more efficient. And to be honest, the only real efficient ways to use upgrades is to go 8 out of 8, in my opinion. Once again, we can turn this thing on, and it will start to dig out all the cobble beneath it and start to dig out our basement. Of course, I am the captain, and I'm always going to be a little bit too greedy. Now that we got the energy upgrades, I decided to put in a few speed upgrades to see how quickly we can get this machine working. And actually, after throwing in our first 4 upgrades, the machine is still working pretty well. It's much quicker, and it isn't crashing for power. So I decided to throw in the additional 4 speed upgrades. Now we have 8 out of 8 speed and 8 out of 8 energy, with 10 times the efficiency and energy and 10 times the speed. Surprisingly, it works. I mean, it kind of works. It's now slowly, pretty quickly running out of energy, but hey, it kind of works. Now, once again, we get some good news and some bad news. Bad news is there's a ton of water still pouring in. And the good news is I can hear the machine working very quickly, taking out chunks of cobblestone. And that's when I realized what's actually happening. My suspicions were correct. Every block that's being mined out by the digital miner is immediately filling in with water. This means as we dig the basement, it is immediately being flooded. All the levels below us right now are completely full of water. This is the exact opposite of what I wanted. This is the worst case scenario. I can't believe I didn't see this coming. However, even with this realization, I'm not going to back down from the challenge. I am not going to turn off the digital miner. I'm going to keep it running and keep the basement growing. Instead, I'm going to try to manage the water and keep it out of the basement. Luckily, this solution is pretty easy. We're going to make a wall around the basement made out of dolomite to keep the water out. I put the last few pieces of dolomite in place, keeping all of the water out. Then I use my brand new shovel and go underneath my base. I'm going to start to dig out all of the sand and see just how much water there is inside the basement. The good news is, as I'm digging around, there isn't too much water in the sand and the dirt here. Until, of course, I immediately fall into the actual basement. First, I have to deal with this creeper. Not exactly amazing, but a couple quick pokes and he's dealt with. After that, however, it's all good news. Because number one, I can see just how quickly the digital miner is actually taking chunks of this out. It's digging a basement for us pretty quickly. Number two, as for all that water, I actually see that there's a cave below our basement where all the water has been draining out this entire time. This is amazing. This means that we have our own built-in drainage system that has been taking all the water out of the lake, and our basement is essentially bone dry. I got really lucky with this one, to be honest, but I'll take it. So now, at the start of the next day, I'm getting a better understanding of what's happening with all this water. Now that we built this wall out of dolomite, my nether regions are no longer being flooded. But even if they were, we already have drainage down there, so I'm feeling really secure. Now we just have to figure out if all of this flooding, if this insane amount of water, I gotta admit, it is an insane amount of water that is pouring into the lake, is actually being drained appropriately. And for right now, I'm pretty convinced that they're effectively doing their job. I remind myself that if this lake starts to flood, we always have this extra little dumpage area over here. Yeah, this area. Remember when this used to be an ocean? Look at how much the water has gone down. I mean, seriously. It has completely drained out so there's just a little puddle at the very bottom. That is insane. I head back to the digital miner. I set it up back to what it should be, which is forge, ores, and I get it mining once again. I even decide I might as well crank up the radius. I might as well use this digital miner as, a real miner and try to get some good resources. I do set the minimum to level 30 because I don't want it to mine out any diamonds just yet. I want to have Silk Touch for my diamonds, and I just don't have enough energy to run this thing on Silk Touch. Although, of course, I obviously come to the conclusion that a man of my stature is unbecoming of me to take these ores up by hand. I'm going to build a logistical transporter, a tube that will be transporting all of the ores that are pulled up out of the digital miner. I'm then going to run this all the way back into the machine. I turn on auto eject on this machine, and in no time at all, absolutely nothing happens. Yeah, that's right. I spend a little time here trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Takes me a little while, but eventually I figure out what I did wrong. See, I connected that pipe to the mouth of the machine instead of the output side of the machine. Now that I have this plugged into the right hole, I can get all of these ores pumped out. And that's when I see one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen in Minecraft. Tons and tons of amazing, valuable ores being pumped into this machine here. Remember, it's only like day 33, and we already got this amazing machine built. Mekanisms is already really starting to shine. Now that I don't have to worry about mining for a little while, I go down to get a bunch of dolerite and start to work on fixing the basement up. Eventually, I get all the stairs in place, and now we have access to the basement, and we can finally use it. Speaking of mechanisms really starting to shine, the auto digger, without any of my help, all by itself has collected enough gold, so that now we can make more energy tablets, so that now that we can make even more solar generators. Yeah, that's right. The machine is now making all of the stuff we need to make more power, to make the machine last even longer. We get another solar array. Pretty soon, we set this bad boy up right next to the other solar array. Unfortunately, we're setting it up inside of what looks like a floodplain. There is a lot of water here. I'm really hoping this doesn't become a problem. For right now, though, I'm a little too excited about getting this new solar panel hooked up. I make sure that the battery is all configured correctly and then get all the wiring in place. Now, all the energy should go into this battery from both solar panels, then run down the cable and power up the base. Now, I will admit, configuring is a little bit complicated. It took me a while to get used to it for sure. It was basically like 90% of this playthrough, but I did manage to actually figure it out and get everything working properly. Now our base has 2 heat generators and 2 full solar panels. With this, we actually did manage to get the whole system working. I see that the digital miner and all of the machines smelting and doubling up all of our ores are working. I gotta say, Mekanism is pretty amazing here. The setups have been pretty simple, and I didn't have to do too much work, and already on day 33, this is an amazing machine that I am super proud of. Of course, this machine would be working a lot better if we could get it just a little more power. I start looking into wind turbines, but I've had windmills before. Instead, let's consider biofuel. And by that, I mean let's go to bed and consider biofuel tomorrow. Now, the biogenerator is fine by itself, but I actually decided to make a little bit more, well, controversial decision here. I'm going to use a gas burning generator to hopefully supercharge this machine. It's a little more complicated. First of all, it can burn hydrogen. You can get hydrogen out of water using an electrolytic separator. We've done this before in Nuclearcraft, so this shouldn't be too complicated. The question is, how efficient will it be? Only one way to find out. In order to get the electrolytic I'm just going to call it a separator, we put a little bit of gold in the crusher, along with a little bit of osmium and a little bit of iron. As soon as we have all 4 of these things, we should be able to make the central component, which is the electrolyte. It's the core of the machine, okay? A little iron, a little redstone, a little infused alloy, and pretty soon we have the separator. Of course, we need another one of these electrolytic cores in order to make the actual gas burning generator. So we put a little more gold and a little more iron in. Pretty soon, we get another core as well. Now I'm ready to craft the gas burning generator, but let's test out the first machine, the separator, and see just how much hydrogen we can get. I plug this machine in, and now I know I just need to get a little bit of water. So I have this tank right here, and I wonder where we'll get water, guys. Go figure. I turn this into bucket mode. Pretty quickly, I can suck up a ton of water out of this little creeper crater. With water physics, our water is not infinite. We're going to have to constantly be replacing all of our water sources. That being said, though, we have plenty to spare. So let's get started and plug in this tank with a little pipe here. We should be able to run water in just like that and get that separated into its base elements, which you guys already know is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. There it is. 80 Fe per millibucket is a little bit expensive, I will admit. If this is going to be part of our power production system, we're going to have to be very careful on how we use this. But for now, I'm happy that we get some hydrogen. Pretty soon, I see that we ran through our whole tank of water and we filled this machine up with hydrogen. It's a pretty good start. Constantly filling this tank up here with water is going to get pretty annoying. Luckily, I have a pretty clever idea on how to fix that as well. First, let's try to get the hydrogen out. In order to do that, a water tank like that just isn't going to work. We have to make this chemical tank instead. The pipes aren't going to work either. For this, we have to make pressurized tubes. The good news is, we eventually do get it to work, and we start to draw the hydrogen out of the machine. And we even set it up so we can get water in and hydrogen out, which is a pretty good start. The fact that we had to unplug the digital miner, not so great. But don't worry, we're going to fix that very soon. At the start of the next day, I'm pretty happy to see that we're producing a decent amount of hydrogen, but again, I'm not going to want to fill this bucket up with water over and over and over again. We have to figure out a more permanent solution for this as well. We craft up our gas burning generator, and before we do anything, let's test out and see just how much energy we can get. Like I said, we're not going to be doing it in this lab. No. We're going to head over to the dam and plug the gas burning generator in here. Sure enough, after some configuration where we get the tank full of hydrogen set up and we figure out how to set tubes up to the gas burning generator, we get the gas burning generator full of hydrogen and full of power. This thing seems to be working pretty well. But again, the question is, how much power will it produce and how much power does it take to fuel it with hydrogen? We make an energy cube because this will help store up some of the energy that is already being produced by all the burning hydrogen in the gas generator. Of course, we make a few cables to attach said cube, and we head back to the dam to set up our new system. The good news is, right away, we can plug in the energy cube and suck up all the energy that the gas burning generator is producing. Now, let's take the separator, which is making all the hydrogen, and move this over to the dam as well. The idea is, by moving this over to the dam, now some of the water that is being pumped out of the lake can be used to be separated into hydrogen. So, now we start setting up all of our machines. The separator is going to go right over here next to the pump. We'll start off with some of the water we've already collected and pump that in. Now we have to power this, so we put the battery right back here. Pretty soon, that water is being split up into more hydrogen, which now we can use a pressurized tube and move that into the gas burning generator. Now the gas burning generator is full of hydrogen and making a lot of power, which we can cable back into the battery. This makes a loop. So now the separator is making hydrogen using a little bit of power, and then that hydrogen is being burnt in the gas generator, making some power. The question, of course, is how efficient, how much power is being used, how much power is being generated, which of course means that our profit margins might be razor thin. And the more and more I look at this, the more and more I'm starting to realize that this might be difficult. After all, it does kind of make sense. This potentially would be an infinite energy loop. You can't produce more energy in a system than you take out. I continue to work with the system all night, trying to make it any more efficient than I can, and I keep seeing that the power is at the exact same level. We're not losing or gaining any energy in the system. I worked on this for like 2 full days, trying to cheat, trying to make a perpetual motion machine, but just like every other scam scientist, couldn't do it. 1.6K in and 1.6K out. It still is at an equilibrium. But even at the end of day 36, I'm not quite done with this machine just yet. But for now, let's actually give up on the set of machines and go to bed. While the dam isn't producing a steady power, I do have to say I'm not disappointed. These machines are really pumping out a ton of ores, almost a full chest. All of them are getting processed, and in this bottom chest, we can see a ton of useful stuff. I gotta say, this chest right here is top tier. Look at all this beautiful, good stuff we can use. We all got it for free, no mining needed. And it's a good thing too, because we're gonna need every last bit of this. You guys will see. Somehow I find a way to use up all this stuff, starting with all the coal and all of the iron. The first thing that's gonna require a little bit of steel is this pressurized reaction chamber. Here, we can mix water with some of that hydrogen we're producing and a little bit of biofuel. Adding this energy into the system should mean we get more energy output. So we get started on the pressurized reaction chamber, which unfortunately is a little bit advanced, as it has to be built on an enrichment chamber. Luckily, the enrichment chamber isn't too expensive, and we make some dynamic tanks. Now, this is not the last time we will be making dynamic tanks, I promise you that. But for now, we only need one. And finally, with the enrichment chamber and all of the extra little accessories, we can get our pressurized chamber created. I take out the gas burning generator, and in its place, we're going to put the pressurizer. This is where the water, hydrogen, and the brand new biofuel will be combined into something a little bit more effective. We collect some water to get the system started, and then I come back to try to add the tank on top of the pressurized reactor. Then that happened. Yeah, I don't know. Look, the water physics is weird. It's a really buggy system, and sometimes it causes water to show up where it shouldn't. But causing an entire machine to just vaporize? I don't know, bro. That one seems a little bit strange. It looks like that brand new machine we built, the pressurized chamber, just got wiped off the face of the earth. Even though that wasted an entire day and we have to go to bed, we do eventually get it crafted up. And on day 38, we head back over to the dam where we can start getting to work. We can add our brand new pressurized reaction chamber. Hopefully we don't cause this to disappear again. We run pipes to this machine as well because it also needs a little bit of water along with the hydrogen. Once that's combined with the biofuel, it will create in this little empty slot ethanol. Ethanol will then be piped into the gas burning generator, and it will burn much more efficiently and make much more power than the hydrogen could, hopefully defeating the consumption of this whole system and producing a lot more net power. Speaking of power, we now have to hook up all of these machines back to the energy cube, including the separator right here. Now, once we configure the cube, everything should start. The pump starts to pump water into the separator, which is making hydrogen, then continues to pump water all the way into the pressurized reaction chamber, where the hydrogen and that water will meet. Now, we just need to make a little bit of biofuel. Biofuel is made inside of a crusher, and it's created by, no surprise, any biological material we can get our hands on. I find out that one of the items we should probably be crushing up is wheat, and in order to grow a little bit more of it, I decided we should get some extra bone meal. And this is where everything came tumbling down. This is the exact moment that Captain's World almost completely collapsed. See, I noticed that we could get a little more bone meal if we put the bones into a Nuclear Craft manufactory. Nuclear Craft, our good old friend, it would never betray us, right? I make my final piston, and just like the good old days, we get our manufactory, which is the core machine, one of my favorite machines in Nuclear Craft. Or at least it was. See, the problem is, in 1.16, the Nuclear Craft update from 1.12.2, it isn't quite ready just yet. Not at the time that I made this video. And in fact, it crashed my entire world. The good news this time is that we did manage to uninstall Nuclear Craft and the mod pack didn't explode. The bad news is that everything in Nuclear Craft, including all the ores and all the ingots that we had made, all disappeared too. I can't be too upset though. At least we didn't wipe out 40 days worth of work. We managed to recover this playthrough. Now instead of growing wheat, I'm using these shears to cut down some leaves. We can take all of these leaves and throw them in the crusher. They're way easier to get than growing and bone mealing all this wheat, and they do make a smaller amount of biofuel, only 2 little bits, but that's okay. We should be able to get plenty. Back over at the dam, I throw in our first stack of biofuel, and am immediately greeted with some bad news. Fortunately, while I was gone, this system has run out of power, and the cube is completely dead. I run back to our base to get a little bit more energy from the other cube, and I'm definitely not upset at our dam for taking up so much time and producing no energy. No, not at all. I get over to our base, but I find that this energy cube is just about drained too. So, I have to stop down the factories and put everything on pause, charge this battery up with the 2 solar panels, and when I have a little bit of energy, I run this back to the dam. I'm hoping that this will be enough. Luckily, we managed to get the pressurized reactor working. Turns out it doesn't actually take that much power, so that's good. It starts to produce a little bit of ethanol. Now I see the gas burning generator with the ethanol is producing 1.46 kilo Fe. Much better. This should be enough to charge up the battery here and get this system at least a little bit of power. And once we set it up so that it will also be taking in energy from the gas burning generator, we can see that we are in fact producing a net bonus of energy in this entire system. And of course, this does make sense, because unlike the previous system where I was trying to produce energy out of nothing, in this system, we're putting in the extra energy from the biofuel, and it's producing quite a lot more energy as an output. Unfortunately, we still have 2 problems. Number 1 is all that energy is being produced way over there at the dam and not here at my base. The second problem is this little guy. See, this is why I don't want to have kids. I'm trying to go to sleep and he jumps in my face. Of course, after stabbing him to death, don't tell child services, eventually we can get to sleep. Now we can work on that first problem. I craft up a ton of basic universal cables. Then we head back over to the dam, and I break a little hole at the bottom of it. I then start to set up all the cables, getting ready to run them all the way across the riverbed back towards my base. Now, it's delivering a ton of power over to this battery, and therefore delivering a ton of power to our base. So now, with this entire setup, which is automatically being fed more water, all we have to do is come over here with some biofuel every once in a while, and it will be producing a ton of energy. Way more energy than the solar panels, way more than the heat generators. All this extra power is massively going to increase our ability. Both these batteries are fully charged. Now we can get all of our machines running, and we should still have plenty of power to add on even more machines in the future. Don't know if you can tell, pretty excited about it. I get some logistical tubes and an extra chest, and I hook up this metallurgic infuser, and with the help of my little assistant here, we managed to get all of this iron pumped into this infuser where it will be turned into enriched iron. Then eventually, it will be turned into steel. This will be a massive boon to our steel production. Now we can get the digital miner started again and fill it all up all over again. One small difference. Like I said, it's time to stress test. So I turn on Silk Touch, which remember, increases the power demand for the digital miner from 40 Fe per tick to 240 Fe per tick. The good news about using Silk Touch is now if we mine redstone or emeralds or diamonds, we can double them. That means that we can increase the distance that this machine can mine downwards all the way to the 1y coordinate. And, as if this weren't enough, that also increases the power demand. Now we're up to 480 Fe per tick. The good news is the gas burning generator is keeping this machine going, even at night when the solar panels aren't contributing. Pretty soon, we're doubling our redstone, which is good news. What might not be good news is the fact that the seasons have changed. It's officially winter. Hopefully, we're ready. One way we can definitely get ready for it is to feed this little crow some rotten flesh. Didn't know that was going to happen. But the second way, more realistically, is to finish this base. We collect a lot of dolomite and we begin to expand it. I add some thicker pillars on the side and make the walls a little bit thicker as well. Also, we're finally getting our very first lapis and our very first diamond. This machine with its silk touch is looking pretty good, so all the more reason to protect it from the blizzards. I throw my diamonds in there because I just can't wait to see them get doubled. Sure enough, all of our rare resources are coming through strong. By that night, we get started on using up all that steel. You guessed it. A ton of steel is going to go into building the base, starting off with steel scaffolding. One of my favorite blocks. It's actually from Immersive Engineering. It's a great looking block that you can see through and that has dimension, but also you can climb up it. I think it looks really great as a support beam to add around the base. So it's exactly what I do. The next day, I'm reminded why it's such a good idea to be building the base. The storm that came in last night has really added an extra layer, and everything is coated in white, even all the way down to the beach. Speaking of which, we use this opportunity to grab a little bit of gravel and a little bit of sand because we're going to be making concrete. This will be useful for some of the tiles of the factory floor. I head back out to the ocean, and regrettably, I have to go poaching some squid. But their sacrifice will be worth it so we can make our concrete. Back at the base, we start to make the black concrete, and that's when I see it. Yes, you can actually make black dye out of coal, which means that all these poor squid died in vain. My bad, the environment. Then we start to make our concrete. With water physics, it's way tougher. I have to use 1 bucket per piece of concrete. Back at our base, we now use some flowers to get a little bit of red dye. And pretty soon, we can use our white concrete and our black concrete to make kitchen tiles. But I will not be making a kitchen out of these. Instead, we're going to combine it with the red dye to make red tiles, which I think look really cool, almost as if they're denoting a hazard sign. First, I get some blue kitchen tiles, and I put these over the safe areas of my base, around where I'm sleeping and the library. No hazards here. We get some yellows, which I think are moderate hazard indicators. I put these around the mining machine. Not too dangerous, but it is a tripping hazard, and knowing me, I'd probably fall in. Finally, we add our red tiles around the factory floor and all the machines. This is the real hazardous area. Keep an eye on all your fingers, assuming you want to keep them. And by the end of the day, I gotta say, I really like this look. It looks so clean with the white. I really, really like this. With the white finishing look, it looks so cool, splitting the base up into all of its little parts. This idea came to me in the moment, and I gotta say, I think I used it perfectly. As day 43 ends, we head out to get ourselves a little bit of clay for the next edition of concrete. It looks so good in the base, I decide to take some Immersive Engineering concrete, which is made out of clay, sand, a little bit of water, and gravel. With this hammer, we can smash up whole stacks full of lead. And then we can take some of that concrete that we made in Immersive Engineering and combine it with the lead to get leaded concrete, a perfect radiation-resistant material that'll be great for building our little basement. A fantastic addition in case any radiation were to appear underneath us. I can't imagine where that would come from. By the next day, we continue to make and lay out all of our leaded concrete in the place of the dolomite. Now, instead of having one building with just one polished white look, it looks much better with all of these different elements on the top and the bottom. Now the base is really starting to come together, and as I see it in the sunlight, I gotta say, I really think it looks pretty good. When it comes to Minecraft, I gotta say, this is my kind of style for building. I like to use blocks that in theory could be functional, like leaded concrete going around a potentially radioactive area. In addition, having all the metal scaffolding is perfect to hold up the base, quote unquote, and gives the whole place an industrial factory look. Unfortunately though, this hammer crank, not so industrial. Probably wondering why I'm using this instead of using the hammer. The reason is I actually want to use the hand crank and work out my arms. This will lower our food, which will allow us to eat all the nutrition we need to balance out our levels. Also, it is the middle of winter. It probably would be a good idea to harvest up all of our crops. So we do that and put it all away safely. Hopefully, this will be enough to get us through the winter. In the meantime, we get back to the hand crank and start our workout. By doing this, then eating sweet potatoes, we pretty quickly get our protein and carbs really close to their optimal levels. Just a little bit more, and we should be pretty maxed out. Although, I obviously wasn't just making copper for fun. I had an idea behind this too. Wanted to use these copper sheets to make our copper casing. I love this block. I think it looks really cool with a bright copper look, and it has a nice ashy look down the middle, almost like charcoal. Speaking of copper, I managed to get this thermal series piece of copper, which lets us make this block. It's a copper block, but it's one of the more decorative ones that I really like. We put a border around our base of these beautiful copper blocks, a little bit expensive, but let's be honest, we've got copper to spend. And next, we can add pillars of the casing. In between these is where we add the metal framed glass panels. These look like giant glass windows inside of a factory, and I think it has a really cool industrial look, but also still looks pretty sharp. There's a lot of pop and cool metallic colors as well. And by the next day, I'm starting to finally see that everything's coming together. However, I was getting a little carried away and forgot about my food situation. Luckily, in the middle of winter, we have tons of snow, which means we can make tons of smoothies, and it helps us get our fruit situation and our nutrition a little bit better too. But once again, that night we head right back to it. I decided to add a little steel sheet metal here to go up against the scaffolding, and I like it, but I know I'm going to have to add a little bit dimension here too. For now, everything's coming together really well. I even add these garage doors to the front. I surround them in some iron blocks that make this look like a really cool, massive industrial garage door. Surrounded by these walls filled with copper, really cool charcoal looks, along with all the metal, the scaffolding. I really, really like how the inside of this base is coming along. I gotta say, this one turned out pretty well. The garage door is even functioning, and I can lift it up and pull it down too. I take a step back to look at it all, and I'm liking it, but I know I could definitely add some more dimension. It's all a little bit flat up here in the front, but I gotta be honest with you, it's a very, very good start. I love the giant steel columns, the iron walls, the black garage door, and then of course the big copper windows are so amazing. The base is really coming together, and at the end of day 46, I'm liking this look a whole lot. I pop inside my garage, and here I decided to take all of my upgrades out of my digital miner. Don't get me wrong, this bad boy is my pride and joy, but we really need to work on steel. After all, the digital miner has done a good job at getting us both coal and iron. Now we need to put these upgrades into the infusers to get more steel quickly before we fill up with snow. But while we're crafting up more steel, I actually get a better idea. Instead of using steel on the roof, I look at one of my decorating mods, Because Roofs, and I see that if I make a stone cutter, I can use the rest of my black concrete in something that might turn out to be pretty good. These attic roofs look great. Adding a window to your attic might add a lot of flair into any normal build, but for me, come on now, the captain's going to take it to the next level. I go to the very top of my warehouse, and once I get up here, I can start my next project. I start to throw down all of these attics in a row. Now they're going to start to resemble an old school steel factory with its classic, iconic, sloping glass roofs. I start to add these all through the night, slowly going up. I'm not really sure how high I want to go, but so far I'm liking this look so much that I think I might go pretty high. To frame all this glass, I'm going to get some more scaffolding, only this time diagonal scaffolding. Even though the phantoms are harassing us, I can already tell, with the moonlight shining through, those windows are going to be amazing, and I'm excited to keep on working on them. Though with all these phantoms and mobs, probably a good idea to work on this in the morning. The first thing I do the next day is I start to add some of that dimension I was talking about. I add 2 more columns of the scaffolding to the outsides, and I already like how this looks. Then I get up to the top and decide I'm going to add the steel structural arm, aka the inclined steel scaffolding. I add these to the sides. They're going to be the perfect border for all of our glass windows. And then I continue to add on even more dimension all around the roof of the base. Now I've decided I'm going to add the scaffolding all across the trims everywhere in the base too. Even though we have this beautiful polished dolomite pillar, because the scaffolding is see-through, that pillar isn't wasted. It can still be seen even as we add onto it by adding more columns around the sides. Like I said, I start to add onto the trim all the way around, and pretty soon, this base is having way more dimension, and I'm really liking how it's looking. Now, I already know I'm not going to make the base one big triangular roof like on an old cabin house. At some point, I'm going to have to cut this in the middle and decide how high up I want to go. I see that right here is probably a decent answer, and I start to build up with the scaffolding. This is as high as the building will get. Now, we just have to fill in the rest. I look out at my garage, and sure enough, now that I've added that extra scaffolding and added more dimension, it looks pretty good. But I'm going to take it one step further. Pretty soon, we're adding this incline. Unfortunately, we are demanding a ton of steel, and I'm running out pretty quickly. This whole entire structure is really expensive with steel, but also really worth it in my opinion. I get a couple more of those inclines, and pretty soon, if you add them together, you can get an even shallower incline, which I think gives it a really cool look and adds to the garage concept. But the steel is becoming even more of a headache. I'm now taking all the speed upgrades out of my crusher because I want to put as many as I can into these infusers to get as much steel as I can. Now both of my infusers are working on making steel. Even with all this power we're generating, even though we've turned off a lot of our machines and both of these infusers are going, they're still starting to suck the power dry. Although that is kind of frustrating, I think I know what the problem is, and I head back out to the dam. Yep, turns out we ran out of biofuel. I chuck some more in here, and pretty soon we're getting a ton more power sent back down the line. That night, I continue to add to my incline, and I see that it can get really, really shallow inclines. I add some sand to level it all out, and I gotta say, it's looking pretty good. We head back to the dam, and we grind up some more coal. That way this black dye has no squid death involved. With this, we can make a ton more black concrete. And with the black concrete, we can make a ton more windows for our roof. I head to our little pond here and fill it up with concrete. Pretty quickly it starts to overflow and climb over my wires. Luckily they're all waterproof. No harm, no foul. I mean, I think. I turn around and I gotta say, that's a lot of water. I throw all my black concrete in here and make a ton more of the attic windows. 2 stacks should be enough. I get back up to the top and continue to add these bad boys in and just put the steel scaffolding here instead. That's all great and everything, but I was right. The water level is getting weirdly too high. Something's not right here, and it's now risen up to the level where it's threatening to go into my base. And while I'm definitely concerned about that, I have faith in my pumps, so I continue to focus on making more steel. However, I keep on checking up on the water levels, and I'm not sure that they're rising, but they definitely don't look like they're going down. This is a little concerning. I'm gonna have to keep an eye on that. Early on the morning of day 49, I can now see that the water is for sure not going down. As much as I love this base and how awesome it looks, I can't deny that it is also in immediate danger. Just as day 49 ends, I'm starting to see what's going on here. A lot of the canals are icing over. These giant ice blocks are stopping the drainage from properly happening, and the water is backing up a lot. Luckily, I can break them pretty quickly. I go through both canals and make sure that the water level is properly being lowered and that the pumps are properly pulling it all away. Pretty soon, I see that all the water is draining and the water levels are going down really quickly. And before day 50 even starts, the water levels have massively receded. The water has backed off and is no longer directly threatening to spill right up into my base. Those pumps are amazing. I just have to make sure to keep an eye on them. The fact that that flooded so quickly with just a few blocks of ice goes to show you just how important those pumps are and just how quickly we would flood if anything ever happened to them. At the start of day 50, I decide to celebrate by throwing all my food in the industrial smelter because I like that tinny taste. I grab my sweet potatoes and fire up the digital miner once again. Although unfortunately, it's pretty quickly running out of power. That's a little unexpected. And when it comes to energy, in this playthrough, we've done geothermal, solar, and hydro. I think it's finally time we upgrade to our personal favorite, fission nuclear energy. I start to look at all the items we're gonna need, and I gotta say, it's a little daunting at first. Since we don't have any way to get infinite water, I know that one of the things we're gonna have to do is collect a lot of water first. Unfortunately, I don't want to collect the water in the lake. I see that the water levels have risen again, and I figure there must be even more ice covering the canals. However, when I head over here, I get some bad news. That's not the case at all. In fact, the canals are working, and they're going as fast as they can. And yet, for some reason, the water is still starting to back up and fill the lake. And I'm not exactly sure why this is happening. My first thought is because I put this basic tank here and it's filled up, now this pump isn't able to drain any more water. So I decide I'm going to have to break that and let some of the water spill out. I'll put the tank here and I'll fill it up later with our running water. But for now, I have to let both of these drain out. So hopefully the lake will start to drain. The good news is that was a pretty easy fix. The bad news is, not sure it fixed anything. In the middle of the night, the visibility is kind of low, but it doesn't seem like the water level is getting any lower either. I'm going to go to bed and see what things look like on day 51. And so, that morning, we get some bad news. The water level still looks like it's pretty high. It should have drained by now. I go back to the dam to see what's going on, and sure enough, it kind of looks like this water level is starting to rise too. Unfortunately, our dam is pumping out water into the second lake quicker than it can drain. I think it's time to enact our first emergency protocol. We break this temporary dam and let all of this water spill out into the ravine. Now, unfortunately, that will eventually fill up, but it'll definitely make this lake empty out first. As soon as I get back home, I see that the water level is still pretty high, so it's time for us to enact our second emergency protocol. And I'm going to drain some of this water out into the ocean. And now I'm getting ready to dig my way into the ocean proper. And that's when I see something that's a little upsetting. The ocean levels are starting to rise. This entire beach was drained before, almost 2 entire blocks lower. Now the ocean levels have risen back to their initial levels, which is really concerning, because if they continue to rise, well, I can't worry about that right now. Instead, let's focus on draining water out this direction. Like I said, this little lake is filling up too fast. We need to spill some of this water out. And it's going pretty quickly, but we can get it to go a lot faster if we use the shovel and we dig out a man-made channel. This way the water level will be much lower and the pumps will be able to empty out much quicker. I come back to my lake. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's actually working yet. It still seems like the lake water level is on the rise. We might have to find another solution here, because as it turns out, I go to check, and I was right. The sea levels are definitely rising, and pretty soon, they might even threaten to spill into the lake. But before I can even worry about that, I see that the water levels are really starting to rise. In fact, they're starting to pour in the back of my base. Yeah, that's right. There's now water pouring in like a river through the back of my base. It's pouring onto my digital miner and straight down into the basement. This is really getting out of hand. Now I'm trying to act as quickly as I can. I gotta be real with you, I'm in 100% desperation mode. I was hoping to make this back wall steel and glass to make a really cool way to look up at the mountains. Unfortunately, that was pretty careless on my part. I thought I had taken care of the problem, and I took on a lot of water. I got lucky once again though, because all the water drained down here. However, that might have been my last time getting lucky, as the cave underneath our base is officially full of water. So if any more water gets into our base, we will start to quickly flood and overflow. Now we have to try to figure out a solution, because in fact we are flooding, and we have nowhere else to dump the extra water. I craft up a ton of create pumps, and I'm looking around for a tank to try to hold all this water. And then I come back to the dynamic tank. This might be our only way to make something big enough to store all the water that could be flooding us, at least until we find a more permanent solution. I see that I have some room up on the roof, and I head up there to start making our big storage tank. I spent all night crafting up as much of the storage tanks as I could, as well as this structural glass. Structural glass will serve as a wall of the tanks, but also let us look inside to see just how much water it starts to fill up. Yeah, speaking of water filling up, we better hurry. This lake is almost back to completely full, which means we're going to be underwater soon. Luckily, by that night, we're making some good progress. I managed to make a 7x7x7 tank. It should hold a ton of water. Now, we just need to figure out a fast and effective way to get this thing filled up with as much water as we can. I'm crafting up as much steel as possible, trying to get the last little bits done. I see that my little goblin buddy is trying to take refuge in here, but fortunately, I don't think he's much safer. This water level is getting extremely high, and it's really starting to threaten us now. I go to bed, and by the next day, I now see that the water is just about up to our level. We really need to finish this up. Now, I added a few valves down there at the bottom and begin to throw in the last of my structural glass. I still need a little bit more glass and a little bit more steel. But hopefully now, on day 53, I can actually finish this whole tank up. While I'm up here, I get a good look at the entire lake, and it's really bad now. It's not just water seeping into one area or another. This lake is fully filling up, and we are truly flooding now. The day 50 threat is getting the better of us. We need to hurry. I'm trying my fastest to get the last bit of structural glass in place. Sure enough, we get it. That slight little tinge of red particle effects means that it actually worked, which is great. We have a big empty tank on the top of our base. We still have a lot of work to do. Then I hear something unusual. It sounds like a garage door collapsing. The water levels have officially risen up high enough so that they've gotten into our base, and they're breaking down the garage door as they start to flood in. Now, I know I probably should have put down some sort of temporary barrier or done anything to stop the water from flooding, but I have to be honest, I was really panicking here. The only thing I could focus on was trying to get this tank finished, because in the back of my mind, I knew that the water level was just going to keep on rising. We had to get this tank draining this lake, or else we were going to be underwater no matter how much I tried to block us up. As I begin to leave my base, I turn around to see that, in fact, the entire lake has flooded and is back to its original level. I look back at my little base that is now halfway submerged in water and is completely waterlogged. I grab as much jute as I can, because we're going to be using this to make string, to make wool for a windmill. That's the only solution I really have right now. And I better hurry, because now I can see that it's really starting to flood in. It's actually going to pour in and down into my base. It's flooding on top of the digital miner, and it's now falling in like a waterfall, completely filling up our basement. There's nowhere else for the water to run. We are now becoming completely flooded and inundated with water. I'm going as fast as I can, trying to get every component I need. I've built a windmill 100 times, but I've never been under so much pressure to get it done. I throw all the pieces together and get the first bearing done. Now we get a ton of sails, as many as we can. 40, it's not going to be enough. We need to keep on making more, which means I have to go get an axe and very quickly chop down these trees. And I mean quickly. And as I go out, I see that in fact, the reason that we're flooding so much is because the sea levels are now forcing water back through the canals. They're coming into the base and filling up the lake with brackish water. I start cutting down some trees, and by that night, I've come home with enough wood. I'm hoping that we can stop the flooding. I make up a ton of sails. By the end of it, we have more than 2 stacks. I really hope this is enough. Now I just hope we have enough time. I go down and check to see that the basement is halfway flooded. My real fear is that if the water level gets too high and starts to flood the factory level, it'll start to break our machines just like it broke down the pressurized reactor. By the next morning, I decide I'm going to make this tiny little platform here, a little bit further away from the base. I set up the first big cog, then the bearing, and then I do a speed run, trying to get this windmill down as fast as I can. And as I quickly panic, trying to get every piece in place and get all the sails up, I see inside my base. This is not good. It looks like it has officially flooded. This is in danger of really doing some damage to my machines. I quickly throw out 5 sails long, and then I go as fast as I can to make it 5 sails tall as well. I'm hoping that this is enough sails, and this is big enough of a windmill that it will get the Strong Breeze achievement, which is the maximum amount of power that you can generate from one windmill. After all, this is about the most sails I've ever seen on a windmill, so this should do the trick. I look over at my base, and it better do the trick. Sure enough, as I start to set up all the gears, I give this thing a startup, and we get the Strong Breeze achievement, which means that this is in fact the most energy we'll be able to get. Not too soon, because now all the machines have flooded. This is a nightmare. The base is completely soaking wet. On top of all that, some of the water is freezing. I'm getting ice frozen inside my base. I head back outside, and I start to try to get all these gears turning. I want to get these gears turning as fast as possible so that I can get those pumps spinning as fast as possible. I very quickly get them up to the max speed, get back up to the tanks, and throw down all of my pumps in a line. The good news is, because of realistic water physics, as all the water starts to freeze up, it actually is condensing, and the water levels are slightly receding. The bad news is that the ocean levels have officially risen up high enough to start to flood the lake. I guess that gas-burning generator was just making too much CO2, and now we are being completely flooded by seawater. I make 6 pulley systems with hoses and try to get those attached to the pipes as quick as I can as I swim through the freezing cold water at night. It'll be a lot easier for me to work if I don't have so much pressure on me. So I'm going to take some of my diorite and make a temporary little wall between my lake and the sea. I don't think I'd have to make it too tall. The problem is it has to be pretty big. It has to cover the entire beach. And soon I start working on my seawall. It's only about 2 blocks tall, but that's all I really need to keep the seawater from just barely trickling back into my lake. I don't know if the ocean level will keep on rising, and I don't know if this seawall eventually will be defeated, but for right now, it's bought me a little bit of time, and I need every second possible. A lot of the water is freezing up. This means the water level should be pulling back a little bit, so maybe, just maybe, I'll get a couple of days to hopefully work on my tank. That's the good news. The bad news is that my underground basement has completely flooded, and there's absolutely nowhere for this water to go. But let's be honest with ourselves, that's a problem for another day. Right now, I have to get all of these pumps and pulleys working so that we can get some water flowing in the right direction. But for now, we can at least get these pumps started and see if they'll work. Unfortunately, it's not looking good. None of the pumps are putting any water into the tank, and I'm starting to get a little bit scared right here. That's when I remember what I was doing at the dam. Unfortunately, like I said, the create pumps will not work with the mechanism pipes. In order to get the interchange to work correctly, for whatever reason, we're going to have to use these fluid tanks. Put some fluid tanks up here, and sure enough, the pumps from create will start to fill these up. I do have to move the valves up a little bit higher, and that's no problem at all. That's the least of my worries. Pretty soon, I can rebuild all these valves, putting them up a level higher. Then, I just need to put some fluid tanks in front of each one of these pumps. This will allow them all to fill up, and then eventually, when I use my configurer, I can have water get pulled out and dumped into the tank. Sure enough, I quickly see that water is super quickly being dumped into this tank. Finally, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Finally, we have an answer that might actually work out here. Now, we just need to see if we can get it to scale. Can we actually drain this lake into this tank? Now, we set up all those fluid tanks like I was saying, and we have them all connected to the pumps. Each tank gets its own individual pipe into the main dynamic tank. And pretty soon, we set them all so that they're pulling from the small tanks into the dynamic tank. As you can probably see, not all of these are working, and they're not all facing the right way too, so we're gonna have to fix that as well. I use a little bit of gold, and I get a wrench, and quickly start to set up all of the create pumps so that they are facing the right way. We still have some fine-tuning here to do. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I make a small little canal that all the water will go into. That way all the water will be funneled down there where the hoses will end up. Speaking of hoses, I still have to go with the hand crank and lower down some of the hoses to the very bottom of this little canal. The water quickly starts to get pumped into the small tanks, and the large fluid tank is filling up as well. I'm so excited about this that occasionally I even forget to eat. Sometimes I forget that this pump really drains you of your nutrients. But I have some good reason to be excited. As soon as all those hoses are down, I get a second to back off here, and I see that the water is immediately being sucked up into that tank. And it turns out this is a huge help for us. In fact, this tank is pulling more water in than the mountains are pouring on us, and we're actually immediately drying up this lake. That's really good news. I cannot understate that. That is really good news. We got pretty lucky there, but I'm not going to rely on luck in the future. I don't want to just let it sit there and get completely filled, then we'll have no more options. Instead, I'm going to try to channel all the water away as much as I can so that I only rely on that tank in emergencies. That means we're going to be building this man-made channel. We're going to take all the water that was running from the mountains directly into the lake, and we're going to channel it towards the dam so that hopefully it will get emptied out towards the second lake. By the start of the next day, we have a pretty good-looking dolomite-made canal that is running all of this water directly out towards the dam. This way, the lake will be bypassed completely, and hopefully our toes will be at least a little bit dry. I spend the rest of today shoveling out a deeper canal so that hopefully, even if some ice pops up, we'll still have a little bit of clearance. By day 56, we're finally in the clear. We can finally say that we're no longer flooding. The canal is looking pretty good. It's a little bit goofy, I admit, and I am pretty frustrated that this ice keeps on forming up. But it's definitely a big help. We should have been doing this from day one. Everything is now going directly towards the dam. And as long as not too much ice is forming over here, hopefully, these old reliable pumps on the dam should be keeping us nice and dry. At least I hope so. With this big canal made, that huge dynamic tank working, and the seawall, all of the water has been fairly well controlled. We are flooding from 3 different directions, and yet, somehow, we're still managing to stay dry. Pretty dry. Don't forget that our base is still very much full of water. I'm going to be spending the next few days on cleanup duty. I take a fluid tank and I turn it to bucket mode. And with this, we should be able to just pick up 32 buckets worth of water and dump them out. And it helps, but we're going to have to do this a few more times if we want to get all this water out. So, I get an idea. I can drain this water into the main tank. Pretty easy. But it's super inconvenient to have to walk up here every time I want to drain this tank. Why not just run a pipe all the way down here? Then I can just set this tank up to pull water, and the water will go up against gravity into the dynamic tank, which, by the way, already has 300 buckets worth of water. And so I do another round of soaking up as much water as I can in this tank, and then I set it down, and it can very quickly already drain out. It's a pretty good setup, and it's definitely going to help us drain a lot of this water out much faster. I think I could do a little bit better. I use a bucket and start to grab the remaining little spots of water. With water physics, you don't always get water sources. Sometimes there's just little puddles everywhere, and you have to go in and clean everything up by hand. That's okay though, not too much of a problem. And after flooding for 7 whole days, I can proudly say that at least the factory level of my base is not completely covered in water. We're doing pretty good, but we still have a lot of work to do. The next day, I get a pretty cool treat. I got an Enderman in a jar, just kind of stuck in there. You guys are just jealous because you don't have one? After admiring my little collection there, I decided to get myself some pipes. We might need them for the next project. And on my way out, I see just how high the ocean is getting. It is now well above where it was before, and has only about a half a block tire to go before it really starts to threaten us. I don't know what we're going to do if the sea starts to flood over here. But for right now, I'm focused on my next project, which is going to help us clean up the area that we already have as a mess. Our tank is doing a great job of pulling out the excess water, but now I realize with all this water threatening us from each side, we're going to up the power of the dam. Hopefully we can go from just 2 pumps working to getting a full 5 pumps working. The idea here is that I want the dam to 100% be capable of pulling all of the water that is rushing through our new canal. I then start to hook all these up with cogs, and then I do that. You know what? I meant to do that. That was totally something important. Anyway, never mind. Now, all 5 of these pumps are all working, pouring water out in the right direction with the pulleys all in place. This thing has been saving our lives, so I figured it was about time to show it a little bit of love and upgrade it just a little bit more. Now, I'm going to go sleep in my nice, dry little home. Now, the day 50 event with the rising sea levels was pretty terrifying, so I know the day 75 event is going to be much worse. We need to focus on doing everything we can to try to keep the flooding at bay so that we can stay ahead for the next event. And for right now, I decided to use this one sponge to help us do a little more cleanup. Remember, the entire basement is still very much flooded. We put this down, it does a pretty good job. It pulls a lot of the water out from the ground level, and now finally, the digital mining machine is somewhat dry. The smithing factory does a good job and gets this thing cleaned up really quickly, but I'm sure there's still a more efficient way we could do this. That's when I notice it. This entire time, these things have been running out of energy. The smelting factory has barely any juice. The energy cube that was holding our entire base together, connecting our power sources to our machines, has broken. I was right. Whenever the machines flood, there's a chance that they could be broken. First, our pressurized reactor, now this cube. I really let the flooding get out of control, and it did some damage. I'm going to need to be really careful in the next few days and make sure that no flooding happens, because it actually turns out that it does break down my machines. Luckily for me, the machines have at least been working well enough to get us a ton of resources, and the energy cube was no problem. With the energy cube in place, we're now up and running, looking a whole lot better. It was just the energy cube after all. We got pretty lucky right there. And unfortunately, our luck ran out. That's right. A creeper snuck into our base, through our garage, and directly into the heart of our factory, and blew it wide open. I mean, I was so frustrated, I had to go to bed. But the next day, I wake up, and I figure it's time to start repairing. This did waste an entire day, but at least it wasn't too much damage, and we didn't lose anything. I fixed the garage door because I do not want anything else sneaking in at night, and I gotta be honest with you, I'm pretty done with staying up late and dealing with mobs. I'm gonna go straight to bed every single day of the playthrough from now on. The next morning, I get up and glad to see there's no creepers coming around. I'm not so glad to see that my base is still flooded. Luckily though, my little engineer brain is still ticking. I decide to build a little drainage pipe all the way down at the bottom, underneath the very furthest pump in our entire hose array. All I have to do is crank the hose all the way down, and pretty soon, these pumps will start to automatically drain all of the water out of the basement for me. And look, if you guys aren't impressed by this, I think the Enderman is. I know that I'm pretty happy, because I can immediately see that the water level is quickly receding. No fluid tanks, no sponges involved. We used our brain and our machines, did a pretty good job right here. Now, I'm going to use my brain one more time. Now, I'm going to run outside, and instead of emptying all this with the pumps, I can slice it all up with Silk Touch. I don't have to drain it or worry about it melting in the spring. And just like that, by the end of day 61, all of the water and all of the ice has been cleared out, and our lake is looking pretty good. And of course, while I was doing all that, the pumps have managed to completely drain out the basement. We're finally looking like we actually recovered from the day 50 event. I head to bed, getting ready for our next big goal tomorrow. Of course, if I had a fission reactor in my base and a creeper showed up, that could be a nightmare. You guys know me, I hate putting torches all over the base. However, it wouldn't look too bad to have a couple lanterns all over the base. I just went around my base and made a few areas where we could at least hang lanterns inside of here. It's not beautiful, but it's definitely an upgrade from torches. Now, hopefully, I won't have to worry about creepers and explosions going off inside my base while we're dealing with all the radioactive materials. I hang them everywhere I can, and then eventually I'm forced to just throw them all over the base. At this point, I don't care. They're more functional and better looking than torches, so you know what? I'll take it. Anything that keeps the creepers away will work for now. I'm going to bed, and I'm heading to day 63. So, I went down into the basement to find out that everything had been dried out and looking pretty good to expand. I'm thinking now it's time to finally clean this place up, dig out all the dirt, and put down some real walls. Step 1 is going to be to remove the digital printer. I actually thought that this had to be on solid ground. I didn't know that you could put it wherever you wanted and just tell it where to dig. So I'm actually going to set it down inside the base. With that out of the way, the center of the base is now nice and open for, yeah, you guessed it, our fission reactor. So I start to look into its very first components. The fission reactor and mechanism needs lead. A lot of lead. Fortunately, this big, beautiful machine has been collecting a lot. And then eventually, we add our lead to get a whole bunch of the fission reactor casing. This is going to be the outer shell of our reactor. So, let's not wait for this thing anymore. We go ahead and we're going to place this directly in the same open spot where we used to have the digital miner. It doesn't have to be too big. This thing is only going to be 3 by 3. So, pretty quickly, we just have to move a few of the kitchen blocks, then a couple pieces of dolomite, and soon we get the very top of the reactor into the base. I break out the shovel and immediately start to clean up all the salt, the dirt, and the sand. After we got a little decent area cleared here, we continue to make the reactor. The fission reactor itself isn't too big, actually. It's only a 3 by 3 by 3 structure, so we can start to set it down. I'm going to be putting in my leaded concrete. I put some lanterns up here because we do not want any creepers down here. I cannot stress that enough. And then we break out our shovel and continue to hollow out this area. And as I've been working down in the basement, our machines have processed up enough steel so that we can make the remainder of our reactor casing, which then we can set in place. This thing is coming along a lot quicker than I thought. I get the entire bottom set up, and now I just have to make the walls. Right now, let's go to bed and get to day 64. Now, as I was building the reactor, I thought this thing was pretty cheap. I thought it was going to be pretty easy to make. Then I found out there are some expensive components. For example, the ports do need a little bit of diamond invested in order to make refined alloy. Unfortunately, now we have to wait for our iron to process and get turned into steel so that our infusers are cleared up. In the meantime, let's go ahead and look at the next machines we're going to need. For example, the fission fuel assembly. This one's actually pretty cheap. It just requires a tank with a little bit of steel and a little bit of lead. We just add the steel and we get all of these turned into fission assembly rods. We're going to need a lot of these. The more of these you have, the more fuel you burn, the more heat you generate. The very top of the reactor has to have control rods. Probably a good thing to add those in a fission reactor. Unfortunately, the control rods are once again very expensive and they require an advanced alloy-made component. Of course, to make the elite computer chips, we got to start out with the basic stuff and put some infused alloy on it to make it advanced. Now, we just have to wait for the infuser to be ready to start making some diamond stuff. Sure enough, we take our enriched diamond, and now that this infuser has been completely emptied, we can put the enriched diamond in here and start to make some of our more advanced components. We take a few of our infused alloy and throw them right in here, and pretty soon we get our elite panels. We get 4 of them, and I think eventually we're going to need 5, but realistically we need a lot of lead first. I cannot stress this enough. This radioactive machine is definitely going to be hogging up a whole lot of lead. We get 4 of those control rod assemblies, but like I said, we're going to need just 1 more, which means we're going to have to enrich just a little more diamond and put it into the infuser. It's not too expensive though. Pretty soon we get our reinforced alloy. Then we get our elite computer chip, and then we get our 5th control rod assembly. Now this we can put in a checkered pattern at the very top of the reactor. Below that, you can then put all of the fuel assembly rods. Unfortunately, I ran out here, but I'll be back. Seriously, like, immediately I'll be back. I crafted up the 6 more that we needed, get these in place, and now this is the completed inside components of the reactor. Yeah, that's it. That's the reactor, all done on the inside. I know, a lot easier than nuclear craft. But if I'm being totally honest, there's a couple more components that we're still going to have to put a little bit of effort into. Of course, those are going to be the ports. Once again, the ports do require the elite computer chip. Pretty soon, we can combine those computer chips with a little more reactor casing, and we get our reactor ports. I get 2 of them, which is a good start, although to be honest, we eventually are going to need 4. 1 more elite computer chip, and then we get a total of 4 reactor ports. The reactor ports are how you move chemicals in and out of your reactor. I'm going to put 2 over on this side, facing inward towards this room that we're making. This will be so we can get fuel in and waste out. These 2 over on this side will be so we can get water in and then the steam out. I step outside and I see that it's raining, not snowing. And sure enough, spring has begun on day 65. All the snow has melted off and all the ice is gone. There's still snow on the mountains, of course, but for the most part, there's only a few little snow caps left. Welcome to spring. So we head back down into the basement and we start to set out all of the leaded concrete. I'm so excited to see this amazing reactor in this beautiful leaded concrete building. It's amazing. I really like how this has come together, and I like the idea that it's functional too. Any radiation leaks should be contained in here. That's important because there's going to be a lot of radioactive material in this room. Hopefully not leaking. And now that the room is finished, let's go ahead and get it full of radioactive goodies. This is going to be the process of making the fissile fuel. Just like in nuclear craft, it is a long, drawn-out, and very complicated process that is full of a ton of expensive machines. So here we go. First of all, the isotopic centrifuge. Already, this is a machine that takes the ultimate control panels, which yes, is the final upgraded version of the computer chips, which takes refined obsidian. We're starting out expensive already. That means we're going to need both of our infusers. One of them, which already has some diamond, and unfortunately this one, which is completely full of carbon. We start to get some diamonds and get those enriched so that we can add those to the first infuser. So we get started putting the refined obsidian dust in here to get enriched obsidian. Are you confused? Because I'm always confused with this stuff. We can make a 3rd infuser. We move the osmium compressor, and we don't need it right now. And now we'll have an infuser for diamond, for carbon, and finally, for the refined obsidian. We move the osmium compressor right over here. We take some of the refined alloy and make 2 atomic alloy. Now we can get a couple more of the reinforced alloy, and in total, we'll get 4 atomic alloy. We then get 2 more reinforced alloy. With these, we can upgrade the computer chips to the elite computer chips. And now, with those 4 atomic alloy, we can finally make 2 of the ultimate control circuits. And with that, we get our first, yes, just our first machine in the nuclear fuel production process. Let's set that right here for now. Okay, let's work backwards. We need to find out how to make the uranium hexafluoride in the first place. I see that we're going to need a chemical infuser next in the process. This is going to combine the hydrofluoric acid and the uranium oxide. It's a little bit daunting, I admit, but luckily the infuser is actually a fairly cheap machine. We can use some basic components and some simple infused alloys. Once our computer chips are done, it's pretty simple and we can get our chemical infuser. Now let's continue backward on the branch. let's figure out how to get the uranium oxide. Okay, first of all, we need uranium yellow cake. In order to get uranium oxide, we have to put yellow cake into an oxidator. By the way, just so you guys know, uranium yellow cake is just another name for uranium-238. And, luckily for us, the oxygenator is another machine that isn't too complicated. Unfortunately, it needs 2 chests. Weirdly enough, I actually have a chest right here, but I'm going to have to go outside and get some more wood. But I'm not going outside at night, so let's go to bed and get to day 67. Bright and early, we head out to get ourselves a little wood for the next chests. And while I'm out here, I gotta say, the fresh spring air is really inviting. I take a break from making my fissile fuel and head back over here to engage in my first love. That's right, it's time for a little farming. Let's see what amazing spring crops are available to us. Right away, I see this banger. Orange trees are best during the spring. All we need to do now is get ourselves some emeralds. We can still sell brass to this guy and get some emeralds. Let's see if we can make brass a little more creatively. We have everything we need to make the induction smelter. Just like any other machine, this thing should run right on RF. I plug it into one of the cables, and already it's starting up and looking pretty good. What this machine is going to do for us is it's going to combine any copper and zinc we get and make brass for us. Sure enough, it starts to pump out the very first pieces of brass. Let's go to bed though while those machines work. The next day, day 68, we now have a bunch of zinc and we can start to make a ton of brass. We can sell all of our brass, and 5 brass bars gets us 1 emerald. That's a decent exchange rate, and I'll take it. Now, I know I could spread these emeralds out and buy a couple crops here and there, but I gotta be honest. All these emeralds that we spent all this time making, I blow them all right away on an orange orchard. I set all these trees out and get ready for them to grow. Of course, we can't forget our best crop. Every single season, all year round, you can always catch the captain growing some tea leaves. And so, at the beginning of spring, here on day 68, we start planting 2 full plots of tea leaves. This will take care of our veggies, and the oranges will take care of our fruits. Now we need a crop for proteins and carbs. First, I started to look at our trees to see if there's any nuts. I know that those are a really good source of protein in real life, but none of them really grow in spring. Spinach does catch my eye, a spring crop that has a ton of protein in it. Unfortunately, just like Pam, I don't really have a lot of spinach recipes, so this isn't really going to help us out too much. Now, our big problem is without any animals, we're really lacking for protein. If we can get a little bit of stock, we can make old world soup. This will have protein and carbs and should be exactly what we need. Let's get into day 69 and see if we can't get some of that yummy soup. First things first, we get a ton of brass. We run on over to this guy and soon we'll be able to sell it for emeralds. With these 2 stacks of 64, we should be able to get about the maximum amount of emeralds, 12 for right now. We can always come back and get more. Not that we need too many. We only need to use 3 emeralds, 1 for onions, 1 for barley, and then 1 for peas. With all of these ingredients, we have exactly what we need for our old world veggie soup. Now we get to clear out a little more farmland, and we even get our first orange. You guys probably already know where I'm going with this. Now with our pot, 1 little bit of tea leaf, and an orange, we can get Earl Grey tea. This is something that I've been eyeing since day 1. Earl Grey will be this season's fruit, and my favorite new drink. So now we head out to our new little farmland and get all the peas planted, as well as the barley, and finally, we can get all of these onions planted. We have a couple of each, so we're going to try to actually create our very first little bit of our old world soup. Perfect for carbs, perfect for proteins. A great way to end day 69. With our farms all set up and my belly full of good food, we can go back to making our fissile fuel. Now, let's get back to figuring out how to make our uranium oxide. I see that we need the oxygenator, which of course needs the personal chest, which of course needs a little bit of wood, which was the whole reason that I went outside in the first place. God knows I wouldn't touch grass for any other reason. We get some birch and finally get some good use for birch, turning it into chest, and then turning those chests into a personal chest. We add 1 more tank, and soon we get our chemical oxygenizer. Perfect. Now we need to figure out how to actually make the yellow cake. It figures it's some uranium in an enricher. This should take the uranium and only strip out the 238 apart from the 235, making it enriched uranium. Luckily, we made an enricher way back on like day 20, so this isn't going to be a problem at all. Now, as we look back at our fuel, we can see that all we need is some uranium ingots, and we've got the entire first part of the uranium assembly done. We still have to work on the other components now too. So let's see what it takes to make hydrofluoric acid. First, we need a chemical dissolution chamber. As soon as I click on this, I get an unpleasant surprise. Turns out, this is another super expensive machine. We need 2 elite computer components along with 4 ingots of refined obsidian. Yeah, this is going to be a super expensive machine, but let's get to it. And while it takes quite a lot, it's not too complicated now that we have all the industry in place. Then we just have to infuse this again with diamond. That's how you get refined obsidian, remember. And with this, we should be able to mix this in the osmium compressor. This is of course where we put osmium, go figure. And soon, after we plug this in, obviously, this should be making us some more refined obsidian. That's a good thing. It turns out we're going to need a lot, so we get quite a bit more of obsidian on the way. Next up, we get the computer chip upgraded to an advanced computer chip. Now, we just need a few more infused alloys upgraded to reinforced alloys. Pretty soon, we get all the atomic alloy, and we can make those 2 purple computer chips. Also, we've got all of the ingots we need, so ironically, all we need now is the cheap parts. And now we have our very expensive, but very beautiful, chemical dissolution chamber. Inside of this, we'll be adding our fluoride to our sulfuric acid. Now let's figure out how to make that. The good news is, the first ingredient looks pretty easy. It's just water vapor. Then, we'll need to combine that with sulfuric trioxide, but we'll worry about that later. Let's figure out how to get water vapor. Getting water vapor will also be pretty nice too, because this means we'll be burning off a little extra water in order to make this fuel. Remember, the whole purpose of what we're doing here is to try to use up all this water. And I see that we can make vapor from water in a decondensing chamber. Now, let's get that rotary condensator, whatever let's get the next machine that makes water vapor. Unfortunately, this one does require a little bit of gold, although that's not too expensive. Pretty soon, we get all the components we need, and we make this machine as well. All we have to do now is to figure out how to make sulfur trioxide. We've made sulfur trioxide in NuclearCraft, and unfortunately, it's one of the most complicated processes of getting nuclear fission, in my opinion. And I'm afraid this next process might be a little complicated too. Sure enough, I see that in yet another chemical infuser, we're going to have to add oxygen to sulfur dioxide. The question is now, where are we going to source our sulfur? And this is actually a little bit tricky. Luckily for me, I have thermal series, which makes the sulfur getting processed a lot easier. We can actually just mine it out of the ground. And turns out our digital miner has actually been collecting some for us already. We simply have to take this and put it in the smelter, and it will get us some sulfur. A little bit though. We can use charcoal to get us a little bit more. And so, I quickly craft up all the components that we're going to need for this machine. And in no time at all, we have the pressurized reaction chamber. The next morning, I find myself out at the dam. Now, let's plug this into the machine and try to get all of this oxygen out. I got a gauge dropper, which is kind of like a fluid tank for water. You can use it to move over small amounts of oxygen, which I put into the pressurized reaction chamber, added in the coal, and pretty soon we were getting 1-for-1 coal into sulfur, and continue to make more machines to hopefully turn that sulfur into sulfur trioxide. That includes yet another oxygenator and another chemical infuser. To make the oxidizer, we need those personal chests again, which means we're going to have to go out to get more wood again. Unfortunately, I'm being a scaredy cat, and no way I'm getting any creepers, so I'm going to bed until day 73. We pop our heads out on this bright new day, get all the oak we could need to make 2 more chests, make the personal chest, and pretty soon, with 1 more oxygen tank and a few more infused alloy, we get our oxygenator. Now we need another chemical infuser. And although I'm making a ton of machines, this one is fairly affordable. Another simple machine. Pretty quickly, we can craft this up too. That does, however, mean that we've filled up an official row in this chest full of machines. And yeah, again, we still are not done. Now, ironically, we were just messing around with a ton of oxygen, and of course, we need more oxygen once again. We're going to need to find another way to separate out oxygen from water, which of course means we need to make another separator. That means we're crushing up some gold, some osmium, and some iron. Pretty soon, get the osmium done, and that means we can make the core of the electrolyzer. Without too much fuss, we get the next electrolyzer as well. We're getting pretty close to having the entire setup done though, and I think it might be time to actually get some of these machines running. But first, let's make sure we actually know where we're going to put them all. Run down into the basement. We put down our very first machine. This separator will take in electricity from the back and water from the side, and I'll start to make our first little bit of oxygen. I look around and find a good spot, and I start drilling. This is where we'll run the water pipes down from the tank. And so, if we look at the recipes and how everything's going to work, we see that once we get this oxygen, we're going to have to mix it in an infuser, which means that the next machine on the line should be an infuser. Then, to the right of that infuser, we need to set up whatever machines we need to get the sulfur dioxide. Luckily, this is a little more simple than nuclear craft. The fact that the pillagers have actually invaded my base, not so good. I've been trying to ignore them, but they've actually walked down into my basement and have shot me in the back. After taking them out and receiving my bad omen once again, we can go up top and start to sort out our way of getting water. I take one of the pumps and I switch it. It'll be pushing water away from the dynamic tank, down this tube, into the base, and all the way down into the basement. Here, it will go into the separator, where it'll be turned into hydrogen and oxygen. Of course, none of these machines will be doing anything if they don't have some power. So it's a good thing I made all the machines one block forward. This is where I can run the cable behind all the machines, and then of course I will run this cable up to all the power sources. Right away, the water is now being split up into oxygen. Now, I've had enough trouble messing around with this separator before, trying to get the hydrogen out and the oxygen, and I just decide right away, I don't care if it's wasteful, I'm dumping out all the hydrogen. This way, there will only be oxygen left. Now, when I put a pressurized tube in between these two machines, only oxygen will be able to travel through it. And soon, our oxygen is heading into our infuser. Now, we head up top and grab a chunk of sulfur. We're going to add this into the oxygenator to make sulfur dioxide. I put a pressurized tube in between the oxygenator to send it back into the infuser where it will meet the oxygen, where even more oxygen will be forced into it, making it sulfur trioxide. Good. This is the first little part of making our fissile fuel. This is where the rotary condensator, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I mean, look at that word. Anyway, it's a machine that's going to boil water into vapor. Pretty soon, we run a cable into it for power and a pipe into it for water, and just like and although it does consume quite a bit of power and moves pretty slowly, sure enough, it is making us some water vapor. Now let's see how we add this water vapor to our mixture. Inside of a chemical infuser, we're going to run the sulfur trioxide and the water vapor together. This will get our sulfuric acid. Fun. I gotta be honest with you here. I'm still trying to be careful. I'm a little bit traumatized from nuclear craft. If you're not really careful in nuclear craft, sometimes chemicals will go into the wrong places if you don't know what you're doing, and you can end up spilling chemicals or radiation all over the place. So I want to make sure I get this right the first attempt. Sure enough, I run this pipe right next to the cable and into the other side. We're making a very spicy sulfuric acid, which is good, I think. We're getting ready for another super expensive machine. This is the chemical dissolution chamber. And in no time at all, a pipe full of sulfuric acid is now running directly over my head, which I'm sure is totally safe. Don't tell OSHA. It's then going into our new super expensive machine. This is where we will inject the fluoride. And so, now that the fluoride is being added, in no time we're getting hydrofluoric acid. Yum! This just gets better and better. And while I'm kind of joking around there, obviously, this is actually getting quite a bit better. We've completed the hardest part, in my opinion, of making the nuclear fissile fuel. Now we just have to get the uranium prepped and added to the hydrofluoric acid. And luckily, I've planned ahead a little bit. I have this whole right side of the room to work with. I run cables over here and start off with the enrichment chamber. The enrichment chamber does, well, exactly what you think it would do. It enriches our uranium. And then I grab some of our uranium. And when I say grab uranium, I mean grab the entire chest full of stacks of uranium. For right now, we'll test this out and put in one stack of uranium. Sure enough, it pretty quickly gets to enriching. The next step is to oxygenate the 238, or the yellow cake. So the chemical oxygenator will be next up on the line. I go and try to configure this machine, trying to get it to pull the uranium in. And I press a couple buttons too quickly, and oops, a little bit of enriched uranium spills out into the laboratory. Oh, silly me. I'm sure there won't be any problem from that. But also, make sure to have your iodine pills on hand. And while we might not have any hair growing in our follicles anymore, we do officially have some uranium oxide. Perfect. And like I said, this part's pretty simple. The uranium is basically ready. Now we have to combine it with the hydrofluoric acid. The good news is we are getting uranium hexafluoride, so that's good. However, the bad news is, like I said, I don't know how I'm going to get it out of this machine. And so, with my faith in mechanisms, I break this machine down. Now in real life, this would be a horrible nuclear disaster waiting to happen. Chernobyl 2.0. But mechanisms is a little more forgiving than nuclear craft. I could break this machine down, and no radioactive goodness goes spilling everywhere. Now, I could put this machine somewhere where it'll be easier to get the output pulled out. Sure enough, I rearranged the tubes so that the front sides are now being filled with all the inputs, and I can sneakily take this pipe and snake it around the back wall where we will be drawing out the uranium hexafluoride. We're almost done. I really mean that, like we're one machine away from being finished here. All we need to do now is to set down the isotopic centrifuge. Now, I can run my pressurized tubes out, and hopefully we can start to get some of our fissile fuel cooking. I checked to see it's day 75, and I can hear all that water outside, but I'm sure that's nothing at all, right? Back down in the basement, we finally get our very last tube plugged in to our isotopic centrifuge. Next up, we run a cable to this thing so that it's powered, and yet again, this is starting to get very, very complicated with all these tubes and wires going everywhere. We go into the infuser, and eventually we set this up so that it will be outputting the uranium hexafluoride into the centrifuge. And in no time at all, it's working, which means that at this spot right here, I'm now standing in between high voltage electricity, hydrofluoric acid, enriched uranium, and soon some active fissile fuel. So, you know, an average day for the captain. We configured the centrifuge, and pretty soon, this thing is pulling in the hexafluoride and already making its first few buckets of fissile fuel. It's a very confusing process, and it's one of the toughest things to do in this mod pack in my opinion. We pulled it off. Surprise, surprise, the reactor needs, you guessed it, reactor glass. And also, you probably guessed this too, it's way more expensive. It needs a lot of lead, it needs a lot of everything. We managed to get 32 reactor glass. That's pretty good, and it might be enough. So let's go ahead and get started. Also, I decided I'm going to do a little rework here. I'm going to remove one of these ports, so the steam is going to come out of the top here. Pretty soon, I start to add the reactor glass, which looks much more foggy, like a Jack and Rose romance scene in my reactor. Ooh la la. I make the very last panel and get the last little piece in. There. The red particle physics means that the reactor has actually worked. Now, officially, we have a working fission reactor. And when you click on it, it has this interface. I can see all the displays, and I can even see an activation button. And luckily, I can see a scram button. That'll come in handy later. And just like that, we now have uranium fuel in our reactor. It's a big deal. And I gotta say, that's probably the most complicated part. If you can figure that out, you probably are on your way to getting a reactor. The next thing that we need is a coolant source. So I continue to run this pipe into our water, and sure enough, we've now connected the upper tank with the reactor, and quickly it starts to fill up with water. We found a way that we're going to be able to burn off all this excess water. So of course, this would be the day when the water situation really gets out of control. I look outside, and already by that night, the water level has immediately started to flood up into my base. Sure enough, the water has now breached and is pouring over our dam. This means that the lake next to us, where we were dumping all of our water with the pumps, is now overflowing. And this is way too much water. This isn't just a backfill of us filling up the lake. This is something totally different. A huge amount of water has filled up this neighboring lake and is rushing downstream towards the ocean. And of course, my base is stuck in the middle. I need to save those machines at the dam. But probably I should prioritize my own health. I need to save my own farms, because now those are in danger of flooding too. I panic, and the only thing I can do right now is set down this sad little cobble wall. The water's flowing in so quickly, I can tell that these crops will soon be wiped out. I run back towards my base, and I see that in the few minutes I've been gone, the dynamic tank is not getting anywhere close to sucking up all this water. But to be totally honest with you, I can tell that this event on day 75 is on a whole new scale. I head to bed, hoping that I can better assess the day without the phantoms and with a little bit of sunlight. As I pop my head out, every once in a while, I see that the flooding is getting better and getting worse. And that's when I see it. This time, the flooding is coming from the ocean. That means that now the lake and the ocean have had their water levels rise and are spilling into my base. Sure enough, The far side of the seawall is failing, and water is pouring over the grass. Now, this is obviously a bad situation, and with water pouring in on both sides, the lake is super quickly beginning to fill up again. Don't get me wrong, this dynamic tank and all 6 of these pumps are doing an amazing job, and they're sucking up a ton of water. But I mean, sucking dry the entire ocean might be asking for a little too much. I run out to where the ocean is pouring into my lake, and I extend the seawall. Now it's connected against the mountain. I am not naive. I know for a fact this is only going to buy us a couple of minutes, but honestly, every minute counts. The longer our pumps run, it can move a ton of water out, and it might buy me just a little bit more time to try to figure out a more permanent solution. I then run to the other side of the seawall and extend it 1 block higher over here as well. I can see that my base is already starting to massively flood, but if we hold the water back a little more, hopefully some of this will start to get pulled out. Remember, I have to find a real solution for this situation. The lake is now pouring in a massive amount. The water is spilling over this entire area that used to be dry. And so, for the time being, I have just about the same solution, and I throw out another wall of dolomite, hopefully buying us just a little bit more time. I get down into my base because I know that the final solution is going to take a lot more work. The reactor is almost halfway full of water, and I can see that this is going to burn off a ton of water. This is exactly what we want, but we have to get it working first. And so, of course, I start to come to grips with the reality of our situation. We're no longer going to be able to pump water using this dam out into this lake. No, that idea is just no good. So we break down all the pumps since they're not going to be helping us out anymore. I start to build this temporary wall, hoping to keep this area from completely flooding and destroying my machines that I really need in here. That night, I go back to the pumps to see that the water level is fairly under control. All of my panicked efforts are working, at least for now. Everywhere I check, the water levels around my base are slowly rising. At the start of day 77, I see that the reactor is almost filled up. Now, we have to figure out how to turn all the steam produced in the reactor into actual energy. That's right, we're going to have to make a steam turbine. And while the reactor used a little bit of steel and a lot of lead, the turbine is going to be a massive steel hog. We're going to need to double our efforts to make as much steel as possible as fast as possible. We don't have that much wood, and I don't know if I'll have that much time to be able to go outside my base. Make up a steel axe as fast as I can, then I run outside to go chop down some trees. And of course, I'm immediately confronted with the bad news. I only bought myself about 1 day, and already the dam is failing. Even with this spillway letting water in, it's starting to flood over the far side of the dam and go directly towards my farm. I continue to try to dig out more and more space for more and more water to run out. But at this point, my efforts to control the water are starting to fail. I even try to dig a little channel on this side of the dam, hoping to pull the water away. Once again, it temporarily works. To be honest, the water is definitely still flooding over the dam, only now it's slowed down so that it isn't immediately rushing into the farm. I start to chop down as many trees as I can, and I get an even better look at the situation. There is a massive lake of water brimming over this dam, eager to flood through my entire base. I start to head back home and go with the flow as a huge wave of water is now rushing towards my base. I see that the water level is just about as high as it's ever been. I really need to figure out a solution for all this water fast. I throw all my wood in here and start to get more charcoal. We really need that sulfur and all that fissile fuel. And within a matter of only a few minutes, the water has officially risen up to the point where it's now flooding into my base. Once again, the garage door is breaking. Once again, we are in danger of flooding. Only this time, it's way different, because this time, there's a fission reactor that could be flooding. If this machine breaks, we're done. And I'm not waiting to see how high the water level's getting. I'm going to completely wall off this side. I head to the back because I remember what happened earlier, and that this is the first place to flood. So I completely wall off the back. When I run out of dolomite, I don't go out to get more dolomite. Nope, I don't care how ugly this is, or how goofy this looks, or even how pathetic this is. I'm going to put glass here now, because I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep water out of here. And by that night, I'm feeling a lot better. Everything is blocked off, and we are dry. I go up to check up on my tank to see that it's the highest it's ever been. These pumps are working double time to try to drain my lake, but even they can't keep up, and the water level keeps on rising. Sure enough, that night I go out to see the inevitable. The lake has now flooded so much that it has risen above the initial levels. The water is now higher than it was on day 1 and is taking out my farmland. The good news is we actually prepared well enough. Even though we only got a few days of spring, we were so diligent about growing crops that we have a ton. We collect all of these flooded crops that are floating to the surface before they despawn. And hopefully we should have enough food here to keep our nutrition levels optimal, at least until we can figure out how to control all of this water. And to be honest with you guys, I'm trying really hard to be optimistic here. I mean, let's be real. Nothing about me is happy to see that my farms have been completely wiped out. The entire area where we started is now fully underwater, and my base is now sloppily all patched up, and we are in panic mode. I'm handling this nightmare of a situation the best I can, but let's be real. This is a 100% nightmare situation. We failed to stop the floods. We are fully inundated with water. The water levels are rising so rapidly that every time I turn around, it seems like they've risen another block. Luckily, I have the steel scaffolding, because now the only way to get in and out of my base is to climb in and out through the roof. I look outside to see that it's raining. The water levels are rising, and I have nowhere to go. I have to admit the fact, I am a drowned rat, and I am trapped inside of this base. My only way in and out is to sneak through the roof. That is what I've been reduced to. The tank is quickly filling up, and our lifeline is quickly running out. The entire world around us is now flooded. Everywhere I look is now surrounded in water. What used to be hilltops have now become islands. From the seas to the lakes, we are fully immersed in water. The tsunami has swallowed us. This is it. This is the real flood. I take the charcoal that I've made, and I run it over to the dam. Even though running machines while they're submerged in water is very dangerous, I don't really have a choice here. I know that there's a very good chance I might not have access to these machines at all. I need this sulfur, and I need it right now. And more bad news. I see that now the solar panels are about to be submerged. I don't think the solar panels can work if they're underwater, which might kill this base. We'll be forced to run on backup power, just the heat generators. That's not good. As intimidating as this all is, I know that I have to continue to push on. If we want to have any hope of getting rid of this water, I have to get the turbine started. This is essentially where all my hopes lie. The turbine is going to process, then vent off all of the steam that the fission reactor is cooking up. And we're going to need all that power too, because by that night, we've officially flooded our solar panels. The next day, I keep pushing forward. Now we're going to make the central component, the turbine rotor. I make 5 of these, and then I'm going to have to make 10 blades. Yeah, or I could settle for 7. I guess that's good too. I get up to the top, and I start to add my rotor as the water's pouring in on me. Then I start to throw on all the blades. I'm moving as fast as I can. To be honest, I'm kind of panicking here. I need my lava, which I remember I left outside. I go to get it, and then I turn around to see just how bad it is. The water has flooded all the way up to the top of my garage. The tank is rapidly filling, and even the basement is flooded. I'm going to head down here and set down my lava bucket because I'm hoping to make some obsidian. I don't think there's any way I'm going to be able to leave my base and find some obsidian out in the wild. So I crush up the obsidian, start to make some more refined obsidian. And as the next day starts, I finally get my last 2 blades, and I find out that my rotor is actually a little bit too short. I'm going to have to extend this entire turbine up 1 more level. Now, up here at the top of the turbine, I've added my 5th and last rotary shaft, although I'm still going to have to get 2 more blades now. At the very top of the turbine, the very top of the shaft, you have to put the rotational complex. This takes some steel and a little bit of advanced panels and infused alloy. Luckily, with all of our industry in place and all of our knowledge on how to use mechanisms definitely improving now, we can very quickly get this rotary complex made. We can start to make the pressure dispersers. The pressure dispersers have to be put inside the turbine. They have to be put around the rotary complex. That means we're going to have to make at least 8 of them. And we have to wrap them around in a gapless horizontal plane to properly control all the steam flow. So next, we have to make our electromagnetic coils. We're going to need at least 9 of them. They take a whole lot of gold, but they're worth it, because this is the actual component of the turbine that will make the electricity. Next, we're going to need the component that actually vents out all the steam. That's the thing we really need if we want to burn off all of this water. We need a lot of these turbine vents. We can set out all 9 of the coils. the coils will go directly on top of the rotary complex and the pressure dispensers. Then I start to look into the turbine vents and try to figure them out a little more completely. Turns out there's a lot of places that we can manage to put these. In fact, I actually start to break out some of the casing, because apparently we can put the turbine vents on the same level as the rotary complex. And if we can do it, you know we are going to do it, because the more turbine vents we can get, the better. I look up to see the turbine. I look up to see a little bit of hope. Now we can get back to finishing up our vents. We get 9 set up on top, and now we just need a little more steel to finish the final 3. And yet another problem arises. We're out of power. Turns out the solar panels do not work underwater. I had to go recover them and bring them up to the top of our base, where they would get more exposure to sun. I then managed to plug them all in, but of course it is nighttime, so we go to bed to get them charged for the next day. And as the sun rises, we are in fact getting a little more power, and in fact getting a little more steel. It's just enough so that we can finally make the last bit of our vents. In addition to the vents, we're going to make the valves. On a turbine, you only need 2, one for steam in and one for power out. I managed to make the last of the turbine casing, and I can set this out for right now. Finally, the last pieces of vent are in place, as well as the last pieces of casing. Now, in these 2 little slots, we can set out our valves. With that extra little belt of reactor casing at the bottom, we now have enough glass to fill in these last 4 spots. Particle clicks appear, and sure enough, we have our turbine functioning and working. And now that this is finally finished, I actually have hope that we might be able to get out of this flood. But I know better than to get a little too excited too quickly. We still have to figure out how to make this work and how to keep all this stuff from exploding. Now it's time to connect the reactor and the turbine to see if we can actually get this working. We get a few pressurized tubes, but we're going to have to run this all over the base, so we're definitely going to have to craft up more. And it was a good thing that I moved this port to the top of the reactor. Now we can draw the steam directly out of the top of this reactor, where we can pipe it all the way to the roof of the base where the turbine is sitting. So that handles the input. Now, of course, the output. All of the energy that the fission reactor will be creating. Obviously, we want to get an energy cube to store up all the energy, but I don't think a basic cube is going to do it. Every time you upgrade your energy cube, you need 2 energy tablets, and each energy tablet takes 3 golden ingots. That means that the bigger your energy cube, the more gold it'll suck down. In addition, we're going to need infused alloys in order to get an advanced cube, and now we're going to need some reinforced alloy, because I think we're going to go all the way for an elite cube. Get the 4 reinforced alloy. Pretty soon, we get the best cube we've ever had before, the Elite Energy Cube. However, I'm not done there. Let's see if we can't push this a little bit further. We're going to go for the Ultimate Energy Cube. Yes, it just takes a little more gold, sure, but the real expensive part is this needs 4 atomic alloy. With our 4 alloy and 2 more diamonds, sure enough, we can get this bad boy, the Ultimate Energy Storage Block, the Ultimate Cube. So, we're going to store this up above our heads, directly next to the turbine, where all of the power for the entire base will be collected. I set up this Elite Energy Cube and the advanced pipes, although to be honest with you, this isn't really necessary. There's a ton of energy storage in the turbine as it is. To be honest with you guys, I'm dragging my feet here. I'm really nervous to start this fission reactor because I know in my heart I forgot something, but I can't take too long. The water levels are still rising, and if I don't do this soon, we won't have a fission reactor either way. And I get ready to start this thing. I'm thinking that I have everything in place, but again, something's nagging at me, hoping that I'll remember whatever it is that's eluding me at the moment. And I still can't quite remember what I'm missing. Eventually though, I just gotta be confident in myself and turn this thing on. We've got coolant, which means this column's okay, a fuel tank, which is pretty much full. Then I see it, the waste tank. Yeah, that's right. This entire time, I forgot we were gonna have to deal with the nuclear waste. So luckily, I have just enough lead to make this radioactive waste container. I get this plugged right next to the port where the waste will be coming out. I get the tube in place, and pretty soon, I think I have everything set up now. I use my configurer, and I think I'm gonna set this so it'll be putting waste out. I think I'm gonna be okay. So I go to bed. I'm gonna get ready to turn this bad boy on tomorrow. The coolant has been dealt with. Our fuel is looking good. The waste is going to be taken out, and soon we'll have all the steam headed up to our turbine. There's nothing stopping me now. It's finally time to activate our fission reactor for the first time ever in Mechanisms. And yes, I will definitely be turning down the volume because this thing is so loud, it would definitely be blowing out your eardrums. I could barely hear myself think, but I definitely was thinking. I was thinking about how the coolant was slowly going down. The fuel was only slightly being consumed, and the steam was coming out. Unfortunately, it wasn't traveling down this pipe, and it wasn't going to the turbine. I haven't set this to be an outlet, so I click it, and I flood the tube with nuclear radioactive waste. I immediately shut the reactor down after I realized what I've done. I'm now venting radioactive waste into my vents, which would then be directly vented out into the atmosphere. Yeah, not exactly the optimal play. So, I quickly try to make another canister to store the radioactive waste, but I don't have enough lead. I head down to the bottom to see what happened with this canister. Sure enough, it is filling with nuclear waste, and it seems to be decaying very quickly. The good news is, the radioactive waste eventually stabilizes, and I think I can rake this. I cannot stress how much I do not advise you try that. That was the riskiest thing I've ever done in this 100 days playthrough. But luckily, it did work, and there's no radioactive waste. And I set the canister down up here. Pretty soon, the radioactive waste empties into the bucket. It quickly decays in the bucket, and then the bucket fills up with steam. I then empty the steam out into the turbine, which essentially means that now that turbine has a ton of radioactive steam that it will now be venting out into the atmosphere. Although in reality, I think we're actually safe. Like I said, the radioactive waste decayed away in this barrel, so it was only steam. And at least again, that's what I'm hoping has just happened. We break down this little waste barrel. Once again, can't stress how dangerous that is. We're really gambling right there. And we set this outlet so that it is outputting the coolant. Yeah, there we go. That's more like it. It's a good thing that we finally got this system going, because we're going to be needing to burn off a lot of water. A lot of water. I head down to the reactor, and I see that the coolant tank is pretty quickly filling up. Once again, we activate this thing. And this time, I'm a little more confident that everything is working. The pipe is now set up so that as the reactor is running, the coolant should be coming into this. And therefore, the coolant isn't really going down. The steam is shooting through, and the nuclear waste is being emptied into this barrel. Nice and safe. And pretty soon we get this configured so that all the energy is collecting in this ultimate energy cube. We are now collecting millions of RF. Already, in the background, we've made about 12 million RF, which is crazy. We just went from having nuclear waste spilled into the wrong areas and very carefully, and very luckily, if I'm being honest, managed to get back into the positive. Now we're producing a ton of energy in a fission reactor. And you know, whenever the captain's got his hands on a functioning fission reactor, he's having a pretty amazing time. Sure enough, thousands of buckets are being burnt off. And very quickly, we're starting to not only produce a lot of energy, but get rid of all of this water in an effective and safe manner too, that's good for the environment. I decide to connect an advanced cable up to my battery, and in no time at all, the fission reactor is officially powering our entire laboratory. And I mean powering it. I can't get too excited though, or else that might happen. Yeah, that's right. Even with the setup that we have, eventually the fission reactor will run out of coolant. And if that happens, let's just not find out. For now, we have to sit here and wait a little while. With our current setup, the coolant will only slowly start to drain back in. The good news is we have almost 23 million RF. The bad news is the fission reactor can only go as fast as this pipe can bring in water. So let's let it sit for a while and go to bed. The next day, and I'm excited to see what a few more energy upgrades will do. We then slot them all in. Now the machine is running at full power. And when I go to look at the logistics tube, I can see more ores floating in than I would be able to mine by hand. This is insane. There's just a huge amount of resources pouring into my lab. I think that this might be one of the most efficient, best ore mining machines that I've ever made in any of my time playing modded Minecraft. I think this even beats out some of the nuclear craft machines. I mean, look at this thing. It's literally dumping coal and diamonds and gold and everything that we could possibly hope for. And remember, this is all working while the fission reactor is idle. This is all working off of backup power. Imagine how strong this will be with the fission reactor finally working at full capacity. Now, if only we could get more water into the fission reactor. Let's worry about that tomorrow though. And so, I'm going to get upgraded pipes that are connecting the fission reactor to the dynamic tank. Hopefully these pipes will have a greater carrying capacity and they'll pull more water in at a much higher rate. Of course, while I'm thinking about all this, the reactor is still running in the background with an extremely limited amount of coolant. And then it hits me. Then I remember the whole reason we're doing all this is to get more water into the reactor. And of course, that's right, it's running out of coolant. I rush over to find out that it is currently massively overheating. The heating graph is rapidly spiking up into dangerous territories, and we're going from green to an ugly yellow. I get here and turn it off just in time, with 0 damage incurred. Yet unfortunately, the heat level is still pretty high. What's actually happening here is that the nuclear fuel is extremely hot inside of the reactor. Even though the reactions have been shut down, the temperature is still insanely high, and we're waiting for the coolant to enter the reactor, where it instantly becomes steam, but also it instantly cools down the reactor. That's kind of the more important part right here. I have a theory that it might not actually be the pipes that are the problem. I'm thinking now that the dynamic valves might be a limiting factor here. Let's test this out. By taking every single dynamic valve and turning it to output, it will now be pushing out as much water as possible. And sure enough, it has gone from taking in 125 millibuckets to 1,250 millibuckets. The real bottleneck of this reactor is the dynamic valves giving out coolant up on the dynamic tank. Finally, after almost a day, the temperatures are beginning to stabilize and the coolant is staying in its water form inside the reactor. Unfortunately, if we have all of those valves being outlets, that means we'll never be able to use the pump system to drain the lake. So we're going to have to make some more dynamic valves and add those onto the tank. At the start of the next day, we get back to crafting. And pretty soon, we get ourselves an entire 10 dynamic valves. Speaking of flooding and letting in a ton of water, I'm going to go to the bottom of the tank and start to break off some of the structural glass. I'm a little bit worried that the thousands of buckets worth of water are going to come spilling out on us. We are scientists after all, so let's do an experiment and see what happens. We break it open, and all of the water disappears. And at this point, I was kind of disappointed. I thought breaking the tank like this was going to make all the water evaporate. But no, it doesn't. As soon as we close this back up again, it turns out that all the water was conserved. Which is great. All we need is more water, right guys? But realistically, I am glad that all this water was saved. Soon we install all 10 of the valves and complete the tank once again. Now, we plug all the pipes into each and every valve. And just like always, we go around and make sure that every valve is pulling out of the tank. This means we should be getting a ton of water shooting down into our reactor. So, let's try it out. Sure enough, we crank this bad boy on, and the water levels aren't going anywhere. Now with this setup, the pipes are bringing water in quicker than the reactor can heat it up, which is pretty good. At least this is a lot safer than it was before. And sure enough, I go up to check on the dynamic tank, and this thing is burning through water. Remember, this bar right here that shows how much water's in the dynamic tank, essentially this is our health bar. If this thing fills up, we will flood. So the fact that it's very quickly draining is exactly what I want to see. We've now made a pretty amazing system. To be honest, I couldn't ask for anything more. But of course, I'm the captain, so I'm always going to ask for just a little bit extra. The Elite Cube is eventually starting to run out of fuel. And also, we're not burning off water as quickly as we could. Perhaps there's a tweak or two we could do to this reactor to make it a little bit more volatile. I decide to go over into the tab, and I see that there's a little area here where we can adjust the burn rate. This will change just how much fuel is being burnt up in our reactor at once. I see that it's at 0.1. I think that might be just like the default as a safety measure. I turned it up to 0.5, and sure enough, we now have 5 times the amount of fuel being burnt. We went from 2,000 millibuckets to nearly 10,000, which is pretty cool. A lot of power being burnt and a little bit more heat. But the real thing is the coolant is being sucked through much, much quicker. Now, even at 5 times the burn rate, this new setup is still cooling the reactor efficiently. I see that the pipes nor the dynamic valves are being overloaded. So I mean, why not stress test this thing? Let's see what it can really do. We go up to 1. That means it's going to be 10 times the burn rate. Sure enough, we're now getting 20,000 millibuckets. The temperature is starting to creep up, even with the coolant in the reactor. All that being said, while things are getting a little bit extreme, the coolant system is still effectively keeping this reactor nice and stable. And of course, the amount of energy we're making is insane. It's now 10 times the amount of energy we were making before. And there's no need for me to turn up this reactor any higher. But of course, we all know I'm going to. I put this at 5, which means that it is 50 times the burn rate, 50 times less stable than it was at the beginning. Pretty quickly, the temperature visibly jumps, and I could already see that the coolant is plummeting. There, right there. It moves so fast that I almost didn't catch it in time, and the reactor gets massively heated up in just a fraction of a second. Luckily, the reactor is easy to scram, and pretty quickly I realized the valves and the pipes, they're not the problem. We burnt through the entire dynamic tank worth of water. All of the water we've been collecting through this 100 days, we just burnt through all of it in a few seconds. That's pretty cool. It means that we can now effectively burn off all the water that's flooding us, but we're going to have to do it. Now the reactor is extremely hot and there's no backup coolant to cool it down. This is kind of a problem we got ourselves stuck in here. This thing is still pretty hot, but it is very quickly cooling off and getting back to a safe heat. Pretty quickly, the reactor is getting back down to room temperature. And in no time at all, the speed of all these pumps pulling in the water all at once will quickly begin to fill the coolant tank up once again. It's still going pretty slow, and this system certainly cannot keep up with this reactor at 50 times speed. But that's okay. This system is still going to bring in a ton of water, and very slowly it should start to drain the lake. Although I will admit, very slowly is never ideal for the captain's TV. So I get an idea. I start to cook up some more basic computer chips, and then I start to cook up more dynamic valves. Now I'm starting to cut out a few blocks and enact my next plan. This is where the dynamic valves will go. And it's where we're going to put a whole nother set of 6 create pumps. Now remember, unfortunately, for whatever reason, the create pumps don't interact well with the mechanism pipes. We need to make those fluid tanks. And unfortunately, you guessed it, those fluid tanks take iron. So I'm trying to find a workaround so that we don't have to use as much iron. Then I remember, Create has its own system of tanks. We can make this one out of copper instead of iron. Pretty quickly, I start to get all the components I need to make a few of these copper fluid tanks from Create. Hopefully, the mechanism pipes will be able to draw water out of the Create tanks. It's a long shot, but let's see if it works. As I'm setting up these tanks, the pipes immediately latch onto them. That's pretty good news, and things are looking like it might actually work. Of course, I add on the Create pumps, and I know right away that the Create pumps are going to work perfectly. It's the same mod pack. It's literally made to work with these tanks. Pretty quickly, after cooking up some kelp, we can get all 6 pulleys. That night, I head out and use the hand crank to start to lower these down into the water. And of course, because I'm the captain, I forget that these take nutrients for like the 3rd time this video, and I starve myself. Luckily, I got a little cup of Earl Grey to bring me back to life. At first, I'm thinking that we might be able to use this same windmill and power these pumps as well. I'm trying to set up all of these gears to run power from the first setup to this new one. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can tell from my tone, but I said I was hoping. It means that, yeah, inevitably, this system is overstressed. Remember, that windmill is maxed out. Even if we added more sails, it wouldn't change anything. Now, of course, with the dam completely flooded, we don't need the pumps running over here, so we're going to come back and cannibalize some of the windmill components from this one. Once we've taken every little bit of the windmills that we can, we head back over our base, and up on this little island that used to be a hill, we start to set down the large gear, then the windmill bearing, and then a little piece of casing where we can start to add the sails. I start to plop on a bunch of sails. At the start of the next day, we head out into the lake, or I guess at this point, out into the ocean. Now, we just have to use our little gear system to get the rotational speed up to a usable level. That way, these pumps will actually start to get a good amount of water into the dynamic tank. We're getting pretty good at this, and at no time at all, we get this gear up to a pretty respectable speed. And now we can attach these spinning gears up to these pumps, and it should have enough power to get them all working. Sure enough, we plug it in, and pretty quickly we use our wrench to get all the pumps headed in the right direction. And at no time at all, I can quickly see all of these create tanks are filling up. If we use the configure tool and hopefully set all these to pool, there we go. Now the mechanism pipes are pulling water out of the create tanks, and we have another 6 pumps bringing water into the dynamic tank. This means that now we're sucking out the lake at double the speed and filling up this dynamic tank really fast. This is the brass casing. Unfortunately, to use it, we still need to smash up some brass. I decide to very quickly run the reactor and use up as much coolant as we can. We already got this elite cube halfway charged. I run it for a little bit longer, and pretty soon it is fully charged. Now I get myself a personal chest, and pretty soon we're going to run off onto our next little adventure. I take down the elite cube, and in its place I put an advanced pipe. Next, I break down the digital miner, as we're going on a little road trip. On day 91, we head out into the wilds. Unfortunately, basically the entire valley has been flooded. The only area that's still above sea level is the mountains, so we're going to head up here instead. I keep on walking around. By that night, I finally find myself a flat little area here up in the mountains. So, I set down our digital miner. Then, I set down the power cube. This thing has so much power that we can run the digital miner with all of its upgrades, even the speed upgrades, and it should get us a ton of useful materials. I turned Silk Touch off to help conserve a little bit of the power, because right now, I don't need that. I take note that our Y height is almost 120, so I set this at 117 so that it'll mine out everything below us. We get this thing started, and already it starts to bring up a ton of useful items. With Silk Touch off, things like this diamond can't be doubled, but that's okay, because more importantly, we start to get the iron. I can stop the machine down, and now with a little bit of the iron, and barely any power used, like barely any at all, I can reprogram the machine with an item stack and tell it to only collect iron. Now, with this massive radius way up in the mountains, this thing can start to collect over 1,700 iron ore. We're going to be getting an insane amount of iron. The question is, will we have enough power to run this machine? And how long will it take? I've only got 9 days left. But for now, it doesn't look like it's using much power at all. This battery is lasting an insanely long time, and we're already getting stacks of iron. I take what we've collected already, then I leave this machine to do its work. Back at base, I decide to throw in our first iron and get it all smelted up. I use our iron, and I make our mechanical press. Then, I can set the mechanical press up at the top of the base with all of the create cogs. As soon as we put the depot down, with this, we can start to crush up all of our brass. And while all that brass is being pressed, I head up to the mountains to check on our digger. Sure enough, it has completely filled itself up with tons of iron ore. I can now move all of this into my personal chest and take it away just like a shulker box. In the meantime, I take all of my iron home and get it ready to smelt. However, I've noticed that my helmet has actually broken. This osmium gear is amazing, and it's lasted almost the entire playthrough, but I think we deserve a little bit of an upgrade. In this mod pack, I see that refined obsidian is about the best thing we could ask for. We have a ton of the powder. All we have to do now is turn it into ingots, and then we can turn it into our brand new kit. So we throw our 38 dust into our compressor with all of our osmium, and now we wait. The next morning, I decide to crank up the reactor and get a little bit more energy powered up in the base. Remember, the turbine should hold most of this energy in storage. The dynamic tank pretty quickly empties, but that's okay. I have to stay focused on my next project, which involves all of the smashed brass. I get the rest of the brass nice and smashed up. By the way, that's how a bonk machine should work. And this is the real use for birch. I break it all down and then build it into casing. On a more serious note, this stuff right here, brass casing, is one of the most beautiful blocks in Create. I love this. And so, I'm going to be using a whole lot of it. I go throughout the forest collecting all the birch that I can, chopping it all down and turning it into more brass casing. Turns out you guys were right. It really is a super useful block. Not. Pretty soon we used up all of our brass. Now the whole reason we're making brass casing in the first place is we're finally doing something that we probably should have done a long time ago. Now we're going to add on to the seawall. Unfortunately, the original seawall is well underwater, and we're going to have to add like 3 blocks to it. It's going to take a whole lot of work, but it'll be worth it. With all of our industry working, we're making a ton of blocks. And pretty soon, we start to lay down quite an impressive wall. To be honest though, it's quite an impressive task that has to be dealt with. The sea level has massively risen and is now higher than even the roof of my base. We're going to have to make a very big, very robust seawall. But of course, the sea isn't the only problem. We have to continue this wall over towards the dam. So I switched the smelter over to zinc so that we can make more brass. I really need to hurry because these are the last few days of the 100-day playthrough, and I still got quite a big project to work on here. In our induction smelter, we throw our stacks of copper. Remember, we have plenty with all the brand new zinc we're picking up. This gets brass, and with the brass, this gets our brass casing. I head out that night to continue to work on the wall. But as I see just how bad the flooding is, I'm reminded this is quite a task ahead of us. I'm not sure we can actually pull this off by day 100. I continue building on the dam and have to go up about 4 blocks everywhere I go, making this wall twice as tall as the original dam. In addition, I have to sneak around and try to find all the little holes where water might be sneaking in. I gotta say, this is a pretty impressive wall. And what's even more impressive is that I can see it's already working. The water level is right up to the brim here, but on this side, it's already gone down quite a bit. Unfortunately, the reason it's so high on one side is because we are continuing to flood. The other lake is still pouring water into our original lake. I go another block high all the way around this wall and get all the way to the mountains, almost where we spawned. This is an insanely tall wall. Doesn't matter how tall the wall gets. Eventually the water will come spilling over, so we're gonna have to find a more permanent solution. At the start of the next day, I head out once again and try to put more brass blocks down. But the thing that's really limiting us is wood. We have to get a ton of it in order to get all these brass blocks. And the more I set down, the more and more I see that the wall isn't tall enough. We get more and more brass and smash it up. And we spend an entire day trying to make this brass wall. I'm just not sure it's going to work. Every time I build it up, it seems to continuously overflow. And on top of all that, our tank is actually filling up too. Even with the fission reactor, the tank is now almost halfway full. However, I start to get a second idea. Maybe brute force wasn't the answer. Like I said, we can't hold all the water back forever. So, just like in the beginning of the video, I'm going to make another channel that will lead all this water to the sea. However, this time it's going to be on the opposite side of the lake. So, I break down this wall and start to let the water run out. In no time at all, this spillway is flooded with water. And of course, I have to make sure to rush ahead to make sure that all the water is being contained. It's very quickly flooding, and it might start to spill back into my lake. I continue to build out the causeway, and I continue to build the original wall connected to our dam to keep the 2 lakes separate. However, as I continue to build along, I see that all my hard work isn't in vain. There is very clearly a difference in the water height between the 2 lakes. The spillway looks like it's working too, because now this little area has finally dried up. There's actually some area in the lake that's drying. I'm continuing to work on the spillway. I need to make it tall enough so that the water doesn't back in from the ocean. It's day 97, so I'm gonna have to hurry. And finally, by that night, I'm seeing huge dividends. The difference between the water levels is massive. Now that the spillway is essentially complete, I can finally put in my last finishing touch. Putting brass slabs on this will keep all the mobs from spawning. Also, it just looks good. It also looks pretty good to see the spillway is working. All the water is going past my lake and going directly out into the ocean. This is exactly what we wanted. We get back to the base and quickly start cooking up more zinc so we can get more brass. But first, I decide to take a little break and get myself something too. I'm going to be making my refined obsidian gear, which is insanely tough. 12 armor, 5 armor toughness, and 2 knockback. This stuff is better than netherite. And unfortunately, it's more expensive too. But I've been fighting hard, and I've been getting a whole lot of resources with this fission reactor, and I can afford it. Pretty soon, I get myself a brand new kit. I'm looking pretty good in purple. As I head outside to see what we need to add to the wall, I gotta say, pretty pleasantly surprised. I go over and see that even though the second lake is really overflowing and going way past its borders, our lake is slightly receding back, even if it's definitely higher than it was at the start of the playthrough. In fact, it's actually lowered a full 2 blocks, and the water is currently washing off of this slope right here. I continue to work throughout the day and the night, putting as much brass in place and getting all the wood we need to make said brass casing. Speaking of functional, the fission reactor is pretty effective at burning off all of this water. Even though the tank is sucking in a ton and is almost halfway full, this fission reactor can blow through it super quickly. And after running the reactor throughout the entire night, we've completely emptied the dynamic tank. We've gotten all the way to the point where it's dry as well. Although I probably should be much more careful about turning that off in time. I'm really cutting it close there. As I head out on day 99, this is my last chance to see what we've really accomplished. Sure enough, the water is continuing to drop as it's another block lower inside of our lake. The spillways and the dam and the seawall are all holding tight. They're doing everything they can and keeping the water all at bay. Is that a pun? Because it's the ocean? I don't know. What I know is pretty cool is that the water level is now low enough to where the original dam that we set up is actually starting to shine through. It's definitely underwater, but it's getting pretty close to being above water. Unfortunately, as I sit here throughout the day, I'm starting to realize that by day 100, we probably won't be as dry as I was hoping. I go around and add a little decoration, putting the steel in all of the corners, making this giant wall look, well, a little less like just a giant wall. Although I do have to say, by the very end of day 99, it's good to see that the dam has less than 1 block of water on it. The pumps and the walls are actually working out. And it's also kind of nice to see that our nutrition is almost perfect. Just a little more fruit and we'll have everything right in its target zone. On top of that, by this night, we can actually see the wall of the original channel popping through. At the same time, I see that my nutrition is right next to being finished. We're getting right to the point where we've actually achieved proper nutritional balance, which is crazy. It took us 100 days. Then again, when your farmland is constantly being flooded, I guess it will slow you down. Speaking of that perfect nutrition, on the rise of day 100, we're now fully on target. And now we're getting the bonus of having a perfect, healthy diet. I look outside to see that the water levels are finally receding to the point where we might actually be able to go outside. To be honest with you, that should kind of be where the video ends. That is 100 days, and we've achieved all of our goals, except for one. I take away the top layer of our garage. That's how much the water has gone down. And I'm heading out. I'm going to do a little bonus material for you guys. Now we get to see just how dramatic the change in water is. The ocean side is almost a full 3 blocks higher than it is behind our wall. I can see everywhere that the level of the water is receding so quickly, it's leaving chunks of waterlogged land behind it. I will admit, I feel a little defeated here. The fact that our farmland is still underwater makes me a little upset. I wish I had gotten this just 1 day earlier. Maybe in my next video, when I'm a little better with mechanisms, I can achieve that. The water is now down so low that I can take off another level of the blockade, sealing the garage. And by that night, we officially have another level of our barricade we can take off. It's now the night of day 100. It's officially done. I have no excuse, and I didn't quite make it to completely drying our valley by day 100. I take a look at my base, and I'm pretty proud of it. And I quickly start to see that this lake is drying up really quickly. Now that the water level is much lower, we're really starting to pull out a ton of the water. Enough so that I can get rid of the entire wall and add my garage door back. And by the time I'm done doing that, I look behind me to see that sure enough, the entire lake bed is once again been dried. These pumps have done a pretty good job. I was just 1 day short, so technically we were watching a 101 days of Minecraft. But still, we did a pretty amazing job of getting all of the water managed. And it was a lot of water too. Water physics is pretty crazy. It's unpredictable, and you never really know just how flooded you're going to get. But after 101 days of playing, we've managed to do a pretty good job of at least somewhat negotiating the water. I'm never going to fool myself again. I know that I can't control the water completely. Building my bases this far down in the water level is pretty bold, and I don't think I'll ever do this again. But with all this work, we can at least live amongst the water and not be completely drowned. As day 101 starts, I look out on the landscape, and we've definitely had a big impact here. We have a massive wall, and the water is brimming around the sides of us. But this area is bone dry. I gotta say, I'm pretty proud of this playthrough. It's funny, in this game, I managed to adapt to some pretty crazy things. I also managed to adapt the mod pack as well. It turned into what I think is a pretty amazing concept. And just like in the video, I couldn't get everything I wanted, and I didn't get the nuclear craft. But Mechanisms is pretty amazing, and I learned to adapt and work with the water physics mod. I know for sure I'll be coming back to play more Mechanisms in the future. Until then, thank you so much for watching, guys. Really do appreciate it every time you come by. I love making these original concepts, and I hope you've enjoyed this one.